The Cross Ranch had been dying for 3 years, though Ethan Cross would have shot any man who said it to his face. It wasn't the kind of death you could point to, not like a fire or a flood or a plague that wiped out the herd overnight. It was slower than that, meaner, the kind that crept in through cracks you didn't know were there until the whole foundation started to sag. Fences that needed mending stayed broken. Livestock that needed doctoring got by on luck. The bunkhouse roof leaked in 4 places, and nobody bothered with buckets anymore. They just moved their bedrolls and pretended the puddles weren't spreading. Ethan knew. He saw it every morning when he walked the property, boots crunching through frost that stayed longer each year because he couldn't afford enough hands to keep up. He saw it in the eyes of the men who stayed. Not loyalty exactly, more like they hadn't figured out where else to go. He saw it in the account books he stopped opening sometime around Christmas. Most of all, he saw it in the mirror. 42 years old, and he looked 50. Lines cut deep around his mouth from 3 years of not smiling. Gray threading through hair that used to be the color of creek mud. Shoulders that still carried the work, but hunched just slightly, like he was bracing for the next blow. Sarah had been gone 38 months. He'd stopped counting weeks after the first year, but the months still ticked by in his head like a clock he couldn't silence. Pneumonia, the doc had said. Could have been worse, could have been faster. Except it wasn't fast at all. 14 days of watching her fade, of holding her hand while her breath got shallower, of promising things he couldn't deliver. "Keep it going," she'd whispered on the last day. "Don't let it fall apart." Well, he'd tried. The advertisement had been Agnes Thornton's idea, the doctor's wife, who seemed to think meddling was a Christian virtue. She'd cornered him outside the general store 6 weeks back, all bustling efficiency and determination. "You need help, Ethan Cross, and don't you dare tell me otherwise." "I'm managing." "You're drowning." She'd planted herself directly in his path, short and round and utterly immovable. "When's the last time anyone saw a proper meal come out of that kitchen? When's the last time those men had clean sheets? When's the last time—" "I get it, Agnes. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're about 6 months from losing everything Sarah built, and I won't stand by and watch that happen." She'd written the advertisement herself, posted it in 3 newspapers: Denver, Cheyenne, Salt Lake City, housekeeper wanted, Frontier Ranch, must be capable, room and board provided. Ethan hadn't expected any responses. Women with sense didn't apply for jobs in the middle of nowhere, working for a widower with a reputation for being about as warm as January snow. 3 letters came. The first was from a widow in Denver, 60 years old, whose handwriting shook so badly he could barely read it. The second was from a woman in Cheyenne who wanted to know if the position included marital prospects, which told him everything he needed to know. The third was different. "Dear Mr. Cross, I am writing in response to your advertisement for a housekeeper. I have 7 years of experience managing large households, including 1 season working as a camp cook for a logging operation in Oregon. I can cook for crews of 20, manage livestock, perform basic veterinary care, and handle accounts. I require no special accommodations and expect no charity. I am willing to begin work immediately upon your acceptance. Respectfully, M. Sir Quinn." No flourishes, no pleading, just facts. Laid out clean. He'd written back the same day. When she'd sent her travel dates, he'd almost written again to tell her not to come. Had the letter half finished before he crumpled it and threw it in the fire. The ranch needed help. He needed help. What did it matter if it came from some dried-up old biddy who probably smelled like camphor and disappointment? The stagecoach was late. It usually was. The route from Billings ran through territory where the roads were more suggestion than fact. Ethan stood outside the depot, hat pulled low, watching dust devils spin across the empty street. Broken Ridge on a Tuesday afternoon. 2 horses tied outside the saloon, a dog sleeping in the shade of the bank, and absolutely nothing happening. Chester Holt materialized at his elbow like a bad smell. "Heard you're picking up your new housekeeper today." Ethan didn't look at him. "That's right. Must be getting desperate, hiring sight unseen." Chester was the kind of man who smiled while he twisted the knife. Owned the Starline Ranch, biggest spread in 3 counties, and never let anyone forget it. What if she's ugly? Don't much care what she looks like, long as she can cook. What if she's old? You know these agencies, they'll send anyone just to get the commission. Then she'll be old and useful instead of young and useless. Chester laughed, but his eyes stayed cold. Well, good luck with that. Heard the last housekeeper you had quit after 2 weeks. What was it she said? Like working in a graveyard with worse conversation? Ethan's jaw tightened. You got business in town, Chester? Or are you just here to flap your gums? Oh, I got business, just wanted to extend my sympathies. Running a ranch alone is hard work. Running it into the ground is even harder. He walked away before Ethan could respond, boots clicking on the boardwalk with the confidence of a man who'd never worried about money in his life. The stagecoach rattled into view 20 minutes later, mud splattered and listing slightly to one side. The driver, old Pete Murphy, who'd been running this route since before Montana was a state, hauled on the reins and brought the horses to a stamping, snorting halt. Got your package, Cross? He called down. Hope she's tougher than she looks. The door opened. Ethan stepped forward, ready to help some elderly woman down the high step. What emerged was nothing like he'd expected. She was young, maybe 25, definitely not more than 30. Dark hair pinned up under a practical hat, olive skin, and eyes so dark they were almost black. She wore a traveling dress that had seen better days but was clean and well mended. She moved with purpose, taking Pete's offered hand but not really needing it, stepping down onto the dusty street with the same efficiency that had marked her letter. And she was big. Not tall, she stood maybe 5'6" in her boots. But big, round in the hips and belly and arms, solid in a way that spoke of strength rather than softness. She carried herself like she knew exactly how much space she took up and didn't apologize for an inch of it. Ethan realized he was staring. Quinn? She turned those dark eyes on him and held out a hand. Mara Quinn, you must be Mr. Cross. Her grip was firm. Her palm was calloused. Yes. Welcome to Broken Ridge. Thank you. She glanced around the street, took in the sleeping dog, the peeling paint on the hotel, the mountains rising in the distance. It's smaller than I expected. Most things are out here. Pete hauled down 2 battered trunks and a carpet bag. Mara moved to lift one, but Ethan grabbed it first, then nearly staggered. The damn thing weighed more than it looked. Books? She said simply. I hope that's acceptable. Books are fine. I wasn't expecting. He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence without being an ass about it. She waited, one eyebrow slightly raised. Someone young, he finished lamely. The advertisement didn't specify age requirements. No, it didn't. Behind them, Chester Holt had paused in the doorway of the bank, staring with unconcealed interest. A woman emerged from the general store, Martha Connolly, the biggest gossip in 3 counties, and stopped dead, mouth falling open. Mara noticed. Her expression didn't change, but something shuddered behind her eyes. Shall we? Ethan said quickly, jerking his head toward the wagon. They loaded the trunks in silence. Ethan handed her up onto the bench. She didn't need help there either, and climbed up beside her. The springs creaked under their combined weight. He clicked to the horses and they started forward, wheels crunching over dried mud. They were halfway down Main Street when Martha Connolly's voice carried clear across the distance. Well, I'll be damned. Did you see the size of her? Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. Beside him, Mara sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Pay them no mind, he said gruffly. I never do. They drove in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them. The road stretched out toward the mountains, rutted and rough, flanked by scrub grass and scattered pines. The ranch was an hour's drive on a good day. Today the horses were tired and the wagon was heavy, so it would be longer. Your letter mentioned livestock experience, Ethan said, because the quiet was getting uncomfortable. I grew up on a farm. Chickens, goats, 2 dairy cows. Nothing like a ranch operation, but I know the basics. And the logging camp? My father worked timber one season. They needed a cook. I was 16 and big enough to wrestle a cast iron pot, so they hired me. She folded her hands in her lap. I learned that men care less about what you look like when they're hungry enough. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The advertisement mentioned basic veterinary care, she continued. What kind of animals are we talking about? Cattle, mostly. Some horses, a few pigs, chickens. I've got 60 head of cattle left. Used to be 200, but we've had to sell off. Why? The question was direct. No dancing around it. Bad winters, dry summers, lost some to predators, lost more to... He stopped. To not having enough hands to watch them properly, she finished. He glanced at her. How'd you know? It's in your advertisement. Must be capable. Not looking for someone capable. Must be. That's desperation, Mr. Cross. And desperation doesn't come from one bad season. It comes from bleeding out slow. Ethan felt something prickle under his skin. Irritation, maybe, or embarrassment. You always this blunt? I found honesty saves time. You need help. I need work. We both know what we're getting into, or we should. Fair enough. Fair. They crested a rise and the ranch came into view. Buildings scattered across a valley like dice someone had tossed and forgotten. The main house stood in the center, 2 stories of weathered timber with a sagging porch and windows that caught the late afternoon light like tired eyes. Beyond it, the barn leaned slightly to the left. Red paint faded to rust. Outbuildings clustered around, bunkhouse, chicken coop, smokehouse, and several structures in various states of collapse. Mara studied it all with the same quiet assessment she'd given the town. How many men work here? 4, full-time anyway. Sometimes I can get day labor from town, but not often. Why not? Because nobody wants to work for a man who can't pay on time. She nodded like he'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. The wagon rattled into the yard. A man emerged from the barn, tall and lean, weathered face under a battered hat. He stopped when he saw Mara, did a visible double take, then caught himself and approached. Jack Miller, Ethan said. Foreman. This is Miss Quinn, the new housekeeper. Jack touched his hat brim. Ma'am. Mr. Miller. Mara climbed down from the wagon before anyone could offer help. Is there somewhere I can store my things? There's a room off the kitchen, Ethan said. Used to be the housekeeper's quarters back when we had one regular. Should still be serviceable. I'll take a look. She hoisted one of her trunks like it weighed nothing and headed toward the house. Jack watched her go, then turned to Ethan with raised eyebrows. Don't start, Ethan muttered. Wasn't going to say anything. Yes, you were. That's not what I pictured when you said you hired a housekeeper. What'd you picture? Someone who looked like she could cook for a crew of men without being what? Jack shifted uncomfortably. You know what I mean. No, I really don't. The boys are going to talk. The boys can keep their mouths shut or find work elsewhere. Ethan grabbed the other trunk. She came all this way. Least we can do is give her a fair chance. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old coffee. The kitchen was worse. Pots piled in the sink, food dried onto plates, the floor sticky in places where someone had spilled something and never cleaned it. Ethan felt a flush of shame creeping up his neck. Mara stood in the middle of it all, slowly turning in a circle. When did you last have a proper cleaning? I don't rightly remember. And meals? Who's been cooking? We take turns. Mostly we make do with whatever's easy. She walked to the stove, opened the firebox, peered inside, checked the water pump, opened cabinets, and made mental notes. Ethan watched her work, feeling more useless by the second. The room? She asked. This way. He led her down a narrow hallway to a door he hadn't opened in months. The room beyond was small. A bed, a dresser, a single window that looked out toward the mountains. Someone had left a quilt folded on the mattress, faded but clean. Mara set down her trunk and tested the bed with one hand. The frame creaked but held. This will do. If you need anything, I'll let you know. She turned to face him fully. What time does the crew eat breakfast? 5:30, usually. We're up before dawn. Then I'll have food ready by 5:15. Is there a larder? Somewhere I can see what we have to work with. Out back, root cellar, smokehouse. Not much in either one right now. I'll need a list of what we can get from town, and a budget. Ethan winced. Budget's tight. I assumed. I'm asking how tight. Tight enough that we're eating salt pork and beans most nights. She nodded. I can work with that. For now. For now? A crew can't work hard on empty stomachs, Mr. Cross. If you want this ranch back on its feet, we need to keep the men fed properly. That means either finding money for supplies or finding other solutions. What kind of solutions? Let me survey what we have first. I'll let you know tomorrow. She turned back to her trunk, clearly dismissing him. Ethan stood there another moment, feeling like a stranger in his own house, then retreated to the door. Miss Quinn? Yes? Why'd you really come here? You could have found work anywhere. Why a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was matter-of-fact, empty of self-pity. Because everywhere else, people see me and decide what I can't do before I ever get a chance to show them what I can. Your advertisement didn't ask for pretty. It asked for capable. I'm betting you're desperate enough to mean it. Ethan had no response to that. He left her to her unpacking and walked out into the fading light, where Jack was waiting with the evening chores and a dozen unspoken questions. That night, Ethan lay in bed and listened to the house settling around him. Pipes groaned, floorboards creaked. From somewhere below he heard movement, soft footsteps, the sound of water running, a cabinet closing. She was cleaning. At 9 o'clock at night, after a full day of travel, she was down there scrubbing his kitchen. He should tell her to stop, to rest, that it could wait until morning. He didn't. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, he dreamed of Sarah. Not dying this time, but standing in the kitchen doorway, shaking her head with something that might have been amusement. Well, she said, in the way dreams make perfect sense, this ought to be interesting. Morning came too early and too cold. Ethan woke to darkness and the familiar weight of another day pressing down before it even began. He dressed by feel, work pants, flannel shirt, suspenders, boots that needed new soles, hat that had seen better decades. The sky was just starting to gray at the edges when he stepped outside. The air smelled like frost and pine and the distant promise of snow that wouldn't hold off much longer. October in Montana, summer's grave, winter's cradle. He headed for the barn to start feeding, then stopped. Light spilled from the kitchen windows, yellow and warm in the pre-dawn dark. He changed direction. The kitchen was transformed. Not completely, you couldn't undo 3 years of neglect in one night, but enough to be startling. The dishes were washed and stacked. The floor was clean, the table had been scrubbed, and someone had found the old tablecloth Sarah used to use for special occasions. Coffee was already brewing, filling the air with a smell that made Ethan's chest tight with memory. Mara stood at the stove, working with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Bacon sizzled in one pan. Eggs waited in a bowl. Biscuits were already in the oven, and the whole room was warm from the heat. She glanced up when he entered. "Coffee's ready. Cups are where they always were." "You didn't have to—" "Oh, yes, I did. Sit down, Mr. Cross. You look like you're about to fall over." He sat, mostly because his legs agreed with her. She poured coffee and set it in front of him, black, strong enough to strip paint. He took a sip and felt something unknot in his chest he hadn't realized was there. "You find everything all right?" "Eventually, your larder is mostly empty. Your root cellar has 3 potatoes and an onion that's seen better days. Your smokehouse has salt pork and not much else. I found some flour and lard, enough for a few days of biscuits. There's coffee for maybe a week if we're careful." "I know. I've been meaning to get to town, but you've been busy keeping this place from falling apart with 4 men and no money." She cracked eggs into the pan with practiced precision. "I'm not judging, Mr. Cross. I'm taking inventory." The bacon popped and hissed. "Call me Ethan. Mr. Cross makes me feel like my father." "Ethan, then." She flipped the eggs with a flick of the spatula. "And you can call me Mara. I've never been much for formality." The door banged open and Jack stumbled in, followed by 3 other men in various states of wakefulness. They all stopped when they saw Mara at the stove, a brief moment of confusion before habit took over, and they headed for the coffee. "Morning," Jack mumbled. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Gentlemen." Mara didn't look up from the stove. "Breakfast will be ready in 5 minutes. There's coffee if you want it. Wash your hands first. There's a basin by the door." The men exchanged glances. Tom Brewster, oldest of the crew, pushing 60, snorted. "Yes, ma'am. Whatever you say, ma'am." If she caught the mockery in his tone, she didn't show it. They washed, they sat, and when she started putting plates in front of them, eggs cooked perfect, bacon crisp, biscuits that were actually fluffy, the mockery died fast. Tom took a bite and stopped, stared at his plate. Took another bite. "Holy hell," he said finally. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "Practice?" Mara filled the last plate and set it down for herself. "And from feeding men who work hard enough to appreciate food that isn't burned." The youngest of the crew, a kid named Danny Hayes who couldn't be more than 19, was already reaching for a second biscuit. "Slow down," Jack warned. "There's work to do." "There's always work to do," Danny said around a mouthful. "But there's not always food this good." Mara ate methodically, not engaging in the conversation, but not avoiding it either. When Tom asked where she was from, she answered briefly. Oregon, Washington, a few years in Idaho. When Danny asked how long she planned to stay, she said, "As long as I'm useful." "You plan to stay useful cooking?" Tom asked. "Or are you going to try handling other ranch work too?" The challenge in his voice was subtle, but it was there. Mara met his eyes. "I plan to do whatever needs doing. If that's just cooking, fine. If it's more, also fine." "Ranch work ain't easy for women?" She raised an eyebrow. "I've wrestled cast iron pots bigger than some men. I've hauled water, chopped wood, and worked a camp kitchen in weather that would make this feel like spring. Don't mistake courtesy for weakness, Mr. Brewster." Tom held her gaze for a long moment, then grunted and went back to his eggs. Ethan hid a smile behind his coffee cup. After breakfast, the men scattered to their duties. Ethan started to follow, then paused when Mara called after him. "I need to see the livestock, all of them, and I need that list of what we can get from town." "I can show you the cattle, but the budget isn't my concern, I know. But if I'm going to feed 4 men on almost nothing, I need to know what we're working with. Are there chickens?" "A few, not many. They mostly stopped laying." "They will again if they're fed right." "Gardens?" Ethan shook his head. "Sarah used to keep one, but after I let it go." "Can it be recovered?" "Maybe. I don't know. Mara, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but nothing. You hired me to help, so let me help." She started gathering dishes. "Go do whatever you need to do. I'll be out to look at the animals after I finish here." He left her to it, feeling like he'd somehow lost control of a conversation he'd never been in control of to begin with. Outside, the sun was climbing, burning off the frost in slow patches. Jack was working with one of the horses in the corral, a mare that had been favoring her left foreleg for a week. Danny and Tom were hauling hay out to the cattle. The fourth man, Miguel Santos, quiet and steady, was mending fence on the north pasture. Normal work. The kind that kept a ranch running. Or would have, if there'd been enough hands to do it all. Ethan spent the morning going over the accounts, a task he'd been avoiding for weeks. The numbers were worse than he'd thought. They were 3 months behind on feed bills. The banknote was coming due in January. If they didn't sell another dozen head before winter set in, they wouldn't make it to spring. He was deep in calculations that kept refusing to add up when he heard shouting from the yard. He was out the door in seconds, expecting disaster, a thrown rider, a spooked horse, a fight. What he found was Danny and Tom standing by the chicken coop, staring. Inside the coop, Mara was crouched low, holding a chicken with the calm competence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She was examining its feet, talking to it in a low voice. "Mites," she called out without looking up. "And they're half starved. When's the last time anyone cleaned this coop?" Danny said eloquently. "Never mind, I can see the answer." She set the chicken down gently. "I'll need kerosene, lime, and fresh straw. Also, whoever's been feeding them has been doing it wrong. You're supposed to scatter the feed, not dump it in a pile where the aggressive ones eat it all." "We've been busy," Tom started. "I'm sure you have. I'm not criticizing. I'm correcting." She stood, brushing dirt off her skirt. "These birds can lay again if we treat them right. That's eggs, food and trade goods. Worth the effort, I'd say." Tom scratched his jaw. "You know a lot about chickens for a housekeeper." "I know a lot about not starving. Chickens are part of that." She walked past them toward the barn, where Jack had tied up the lame mare. Ethan followed, curious despite himself. Mara approached the horse slowly, letting it see her, talking in that same low voice she'd used with the chickens. The mare's ears flicked back, nervous, but she didn't pull away when Mara ran a hand down her neck. "What happened?" she asked Jack. "Don't know. Started favoring it about a week ago. Thought it might be a stone bruise, but I checked her hoof and didn't find anything." Mara crouched and lifted the mare's leg with surprising ease. The horse shifted but settled when Mara murmured to her. She examined the hoof carefully, then moved her hands up the leg, pressing gently. "Here," she said finally, fingers just above the hoof. "She's got heat and swelling, probably an abscess starting. Has she been turned out in wet ground?" Jack blinked. "Yeah, actually. We had rain 2 weeks back and the lower pasture got muddy. That'll do it. Bacteria gets in through cracks in the hoof. It'll burst on its own eventually, but she'll be in pain until it does. We can help it along." "How?" "Poultice. Epsom salts, warm water, bandage. Keep it warm and let it draw out the infection. She'll be sound in a week or so." Jack looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Mara. "Where'd you learn horse doctoring?" he asked. "Logging camp. They had draft horses. When you're 40 miles from the nearest town, you learn to handle injuries yourself or you lose animals you can't afford to replace." She straightened, releasing the mare's leg. "If you have Epsom salts, I can start treatment today." "We don't," Jack said. "I can ride to town and get some." "Add it to my list." She patted the mare's shoulder. "She'll be all right. Might want to keep her stalled for a few days, though." She walked away before anyone could respond, heading back toward the house. Tom and Danny had drifted closer, drawn by curiosity. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom said. "She actually knows what she's doing." "Don't sound so surprised," Ethan said mildly. "You are too, boss. Don't pretend you're not." Fair point. Lunch was bean soup, somehow made interesting with herbs she'd found growing wild behind the barn, and the last of the morning's biscuits. Dinner was salt pork with potatoes she'd liberated from the near-dead garden, fried crispy and seasoned with something that made them actually worth eating. The men ate like they'd been starving, which maybe they had been. That evening, after the crew had headed to the bunkhouse, Ethan found Mara in the kitchen again, working by lamplight. She'd found the old account books, the ones Sarah used to keep for household expenses, and was making notes. "You should rest," he said. "I will, soon." She didn't look up. "I've been thinking about the chickens. If we can get them laying again, that's eggs. We can trade eggs for other supplies, flour, sugar, things we can't produce ourselves. There's a garden bed behind the house that could be recovered. It's late in the season, but we could plant some cold weather crops. Turnips, cabbage, maybe some root vegetables that'll keep through winter. Mara, and I noticed you've got blackberry bushes along the north fence line. They're wild, but the berries are still good. We could preserve them, make jam, maybe trade that too. There's a creek. Is there fish?" "Some. Trout mostly." "Good. I can make nets. Tom seems like he knows his way around a rifle. Is there game?" "Deer, elk, some smaller game, but Mara..." She finally looked up. "What?" "Why are you doing all this?" She frowned. "You hired me to help run this household. I hired you to cook and clean, and I'm doing that. But cooking and cleaning won't save this ranch if there's no money for food to cook or no ranch left to clean." She set down her pen. "I heard what you and Jack were talking about this afternoon, about the banknote, about selling more cattle. You're in trouble, Ethan." "That's not your concern." "It is if I want to keep having a place to work." She leaned back in her chair. "I didn't come all this way to watch everything fall apart in 6 months. If I'm going to be here, I might as well make myself useful in every way I can. That's just practical." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat heavily. "You don't owe me anything." "No, but I owe myself something. I owe myself the chance to prove what I can do when someone actually gives me that chance." She met his eyes. "You did that, whether you meant to or not. So let me do this." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it wasn't her problem, that she'd done enough already, that she should just focus on what she was hired for and let him worry about the rest. But the truth was, he was drowning, and she'd just thrown him the first rope he'd seen in 3 years. "All right," he said quietly, "but you work normal hours. I won't have you running yourself into the ground." "I'll rest when there's time to rest." "I'll rest," she repeated. "When there's time." She went back to her notes, and Ethan sat there a while longer, watching her work. Lamplight caught the dark of her hair, the determined set of her jaw, the ink-stained fingers that moved with purpose across the page. Sarah would have liked her, he thought, would have appreciated the stubbornness, the refusal to be anything less than useful. That thought hurt, but in a different way than usual, less like a wound, more like a bruise that was starting to heal. He left her to her planning and went upstairs to bed, where he lay awake longer than he should have, thinking about accounts and cattle and women who showed up expecting nothing and somehow ended up changing everything. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm. Mara rose before the sun and had breakfast ready when the men stumbled in. She cleaned, she cooked, she worked. She scrubbed the chicken coop until it gleamed and rebuilt the nest boxes from scrap wood. The chickens started laying again, not much at first, just a few eggs, but more each day. She took over the garden with the same ruthless efficiency, clearing dead plants and turning soil that hadn't been touched in years. Jack helped sometimes, and Tom, and even Danny when she asked. She got cold weather seeds from Agnes Thornton in town, paid for with a promise of eggs and labor, and planted them in careful rows. She fished the creek and brought back trout. She found the old smoking racks in the back of the smokehouse and got them working again. She made jam from the blackberries and sealed it in jars she'd salvaged from the basement. And slowly, quietly, the ranch started to feel less like a dying thing and more like something that might survive. The men stopped making jokes, stopped exchanging glances when she spoke, started listening when she made suggestions because her suggestions kept being good ones. Tom started asking her about his horse's limp before he asked Jack. Danny started showing her the fence work to make sure he'd done it right. Miguel, who barely spoke to anyone, started leaving wildflowers on the kitchen table, a silent thank you for meals that actually tasted like someone cared. And Ethan didn't know what to think. She was capable, yes. Hardworking, absolutely. But there was more to it than that. She moved through the ranch like she'd been there for years instead of weeks, understanding its rhythms, seeing what needed doing before he did. She never complained, never made excuses. When something was broken, she fixed it. When something was needed, she found a way to provide it. And she did it all while the town watched and whispered. Because of course they did. Martha Connolly spread word like wildfire about the enormous woman working at the Cross Ranch, about how inappropriate it was, about how people would talk. Chester Holt made jokes in the saloon about desperate men and desperate measures. Even Agnes Thornton, who'd helped arrange the whole thing, seemed uncertain now that she'd seen Mara in person. Ethan heard it all. The comments, the speculation, the barely veiled insults. He ignored them, let them talk. Mara was worth 10 of any of them, and he was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, hiring her was the first smart thing he'd done in 3 years. The storm came on a Thursday. They should have seen it coming. October storms were vicious in Montana, and this one had been building for days. Dark clouds massing in the west, wind picking up, sharp and cold, the kind of weather that made animals nervous and men check their gear twice. Ethan sent Miguel and Danny to bring in the cattle from the far pasture, sent Tom to secure the barn, told Jack to double-check the roof repairs they'd made last month. "And you?" Mara asked, watching from the kitchen door. "I'm going to make sure the horses are settled. Storm like this spooks them. I'll help." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She grabbed her coat. "But we'll finish faster with 2 people." They worked in tense silence, moving horses into the barn, securing doors, checking that everything was tied down or brought inside. The wind was howling now, carrying the first spits of rain that felt like ice. By the time they finished, the storm was on them, full force, violent, the kind that turned the world into chaos. Rain hammered the roof, wind screamed through the cracks, lightning lit the sky in jagged scars. "Everyone inside!" Ethan shouted over the roar. The crew didn't argue. They bolted for the bunkhouse while Ethan and Mara ran for the main house, arriving breathless and soaked. Mara shed her coat and immediately started closing shutters. Ethan lit lamps, checked that the doors were secure, tried to think if they'd forgotten anything. "The cattle," Mara said suddenly. "Miguel and Danny got them in." "Did they get them all?" Ethan hesitated. "I think so. Why?" "Because I counted when they brought them through. There were 58. You said you had 60 head. His stomach dropped. "You sure?" "I'm sure." 2 cattle. Missing in a storm like this? Damn it. "I'll go find them," he said, reaching for his coat. "Not alone, you won't." Mara was already pulling her coat back on. "You'll get lost in this and die of stupidity." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm telling. Come on." They went back out into hell. The rain was horizontal now, driven by wind that tried to knock them sideways. Lightning turned the world white and purple. Thunder cracked so loud it felt like the ground was breaking. Ethan led them toward the north pasture, where the cattle had been grazing. Mara stayed close, one hand on his shoulder so they wouldn't get separated. The mud sucked at their boots. The cold cut through their clothes like knives. He almost missed the cattle entirely. Two shapes huddled against the fence line, terrified and refusing to move. "There!" Mara shouted. They approached carefully. The cattle, a cow and her calf, were spooked badly, eyes rolling white in the lightning. Ethan tried to herd them, but they bolted in the wrong direction. Mara moved faster than he'd have thought possible. She circled around, cut them off, used her size to block their path. She didn't shout. Shouting wouldn't help in this wind, but she moved with purpose, pushing them, guiding them, working with an instinct he didn't know she had. Between them, they got the cattle turned, got them moving toward the barn. It took 20 minutes that felt like hours, every step a battle against mud and wind and animal panic. They got them into the barn, got the door closed, stood there in the relative quiet, breathing hard, soaked to the bone. Mara was shaking, from cold or adrenaline or both. "You all right?" Ethan asked. "I will be. You?" "I'm fine. Mara, what you just did was necessary. Don't make it more than it was." But she was smiling, just slightly. "Though I'll admit, I've never worked cattle in a storm quite that bad before." "You did better than most men I've worked with. High praise." "I mean it." She met his eyes, rain still dripping down her face. "I know you do." Something passed between them in that moment. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. The acknowledgement that they just survived something together, and that survival meant something. The door banged open and Jack stumbled in, wild-eyed. "You two all right? I saw you run out and thought you'd lost your damn minds." "Just securing livestock," Ethan said. "We're fine." Jack looked between them, at their soaked clothes and exhausted faces. "You're both idiots," he said, but there was relief in his voice. "Get inside before you freeze to death." They went. Mara made coffee while Ethan built up the fire. Neither spoke much. There didn't seem to be much to say. When the coffee was ready, she handed him a cup and sat across from him at the table. "You're going to lose more cattle if we don't fix that fence," she said. "It's weak in 3 places. I noticed it last week." "I know, I just haven't had time." "Make time, or let me help fix it, whichever." Ethan shook his head, but he was almost laughing. "You ever rest?" "Not when there's work to do. That's not healthy." "Neither is losing cattle you can't afford to replace." She had him there. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, in the warm kitchen with coffee and firelight, Ethan looked at the woman across from him, soaked and stubborn and absolutely refusing to quit, and thought, this is what Sarah meant. When she said, "Keep it going," when she said, "Don't let it fall apart," she didn't mean the ranch. She meant keep trying, keep fighting, keep finding reasons to wake up in the morning, and maybe, just maybe, Mara Quinn was one of those reasons. He didn't say any of that out loud, just drank his coffee and let the silence settle, comfortable and earned. Tomorrow they'd fix fences. They'd feed chickens and check cattle and do all the 100 things that needed doing, but tonight they'd survived a storm. That felt like enough. The fence work started 3 days after the storm, once the ground had dried enough to dig post holes without drowning in mud. Ethan expected to do it himself, maybe with Jack's help, if they could spare him from other work. What he got instead was Mara at dawn, already dressed in work clothes he didn't know she owned, canvas pants that had seen better days, and a shirt that might have belonged to a man twice her size, sleeves rolled to her elbows. "You're not seriously planning to help with this," he said. "I'm not planning. I'm doing." She hoisted a coil of wire over her shoulder like it weighed nothing. "You coming, or are you going to stand there looking surprised all morning?" Tom was already at the fence line, marking the weak spots with stakes. He glanced up when they approached, took in Mara's work clothes, and raised an eyebrow. "She know what she signed up for?" he asked Ethan. "I'm standing right here," Mara said. "And yes, I know. You dig out the old posts, set new ones, string wire, staple it down. Not exactly complicated. Knowing and doing are different things." "Then I guess we'll find out which one I'm better at." She dropped the wire and grabbed a shovel, attacking the first weak post with the kind of determination that made arguing seem pointless. Tom watched for a minute, then shrugged and went back to work. They worked through the morning, hard, steady labor that left hands raw and backs aching. Mara didn't complain, didn't slow down. When they broke for water, she drank and got right back to it. When Tom made a comment about her technique being sloppy, she adjusted without arguing and did it better the next time. By noon, they'd replaced 4 posts and restrung 30 feet of fence. Not bad, Tom admitted grudgingly. For a first-timer. I've mended fence before, Mara said, wiping sweat from her forehead. Just not on this scale. Where'd you learn? Farm in Oregon. We had goats that thought fences were suggestions. She tested the tension on the wire they'd just strung. This should hold through winter, but you'll want to check it again in spring. Wire contracts when it's cold, expands when it warms up. Staples can work loose. Tom looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back. What? Mara asked. Nothing, Ethan said. Just didn't expect you to know that. There's a lot you don't expect about me. You'll get used to it. She moved to the next section, already planning the work, and Ethan found himself smiling despite the exhaustion. That night at dinner, Danny asked how the fence work had gone. Got more done than I thought we would, Ethan said. Should be finished tomorrow if the weather holds. Miss Quinn actually helped? Danny sounded skeptical. More than helped. She worked harder than some men I've hired. Across the table, Mara focused on her food, but her mouth quirked slightly at the corner. Huh, Danny said. No offense, Miss Quinn, but you don't exactly look like someone who can do hard work? She raised an eyebrow. I get that a lot. Usually from people who've never actually watched me work. I didn't mean, yes, you did, and that's fine. I'd rather prove what I can do than waste time arguing about it. Danny flushed and went back to his meal. Jack coughed into his hand, hiding what might have been a laugh. The fence was finished by the following afternoon. Ethan walked the line alone after they'd packed up the tools, checking each post, each section of wire. Everything was solid. Better than solid, it was the kind of work that would last. He found Mara in the kitchen, scrubbing her hands at the basin. Her knuckles were raw, nails broken short. She'd have blisters tomorrow, probably already had some forming. You should have worn gloves, he said. Didn't have any that fit. She dried her hands carefully. I'll toughen up. You don't have to toughen up. You're not one of the crew. Aren't I? She turned to face him. I eat at the same table. I work the same hours. I sleep under the same roof. What's the difference? The difference is I hired you as a housekeeper. And I'm keeping house. But there's more that needs doing, and I can do it, so I am. You have a problem with that. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was, he didn't have a problem with it. The work was getting done, work that desperately needed doing, and she was doing it without complaint or drama. What kind of fool would he be to tell her to stop? No problem, he said finally. Just don't want you thinking you have to prove anything. I always have to prove something. That's just how it is. She started preparing dinner, movements efficient and practiced. But I appreciate the thought. She didn't say anything else, and Ethan didn't push. He was learning that Mara said what she meant and nothing more. No hidden meanings, no games. It was refreshing and unsettling in equal measure. The town noticed, of course. Towns like Broken Ridge noticed everything. When Ethan rode in for supplies the following week, he felt the stares, heard the whispers that stopped when he got too close. Martha Connolly practically tackled him outside the general store, all false concern and genuine nosiness. Ethan Cross, I've been meaning to speak with you. Mrs. Connolly? He touched his hat brim, trying to move past her. She blocked his path with surprising agility for a woman her size. About your new housekeeper. What about her? Well, people are talking. People always talk. Yes, but this is different. A woman like that, living out at your ranch with all those men. A woman like what? Ethan kept his voice level, but something cold was forming in his chest. Martha faltered. You know what I mean. No, I really don't. Why don't you explain it to me? I just think it's inappropriate. The way she looks, the way she works harder than half the men in this town, the way she's helping me keep my ranch from going under. That what you mean? There's no need to be rude, Ethan. I'm only thinking of your reputation. My reputation is my business, and Mara Quinn is the best thing that's happened to that ranch in 3 years. So unless you've got something useful to say, I'd appreciate you keeping your thoughts to yourself. He pushed past her into the store, leaving her sputtering on the boardwalk. Inside, Agnes Thornton was behind the counter, tallying accounts. She looked up when he entered, something knowing in her eyes. Let me guess. Martha tried to save your soul? Something like that. Don't pay her any mind. She's got nothing better to do than worry about other people's business. Agnes pulled out her order book. How's Miss Quinn working out? Really, I mean, not the version you'd tell Martha. Ethan considered the question. She's good, better than I expected. High praise from you. She works hard, doesn't complain. The men respect her, or they're learning to. And she's got ideas, good ones, about how to make the ranch more efficient. Such as? Getting the chickens laying again. Replanting the garden. She's been fishing the creek, smoking the catch so we have protein that doesn't cost anything. She even helped fix fences last week. Agnes raised both eyebrows. Mara Quinn fixed fences? Did a better job than some men I've hired. Tom said so himself. Well, Agnes made a note in her book. Sounds like I chose well. You did. Thanks for that. He handed over his list. How much can I get on credit? How much do you need? More than I can afford. Agnes sighed and started gathering supplies. They both knew the dance, him asking for what he needed, her giving what she could, the debt growing larger every month. But she never pushed, never made him feel small about it. For that alone, he'd always be grateful. He was loading the wagon when Chester Holt appeared, like a bad smell that wouldn't dissipate. Heard you've got your housekeeper doing ranch work now, Chester said, leaning against a post with practiced ease. That true? What's it to you? Just seems desperate is all. Can't afford real help, so you're making do with whatever you can get. Ethan tied off a sack of flour with more force than necessary. Mara's worth 3 of most men. That's what they're saying in town, though not exactly in a complimentary way, if you catch my meaning. I don't, and I don't care to. Chester's smile was sharp. People are wondering what exactly goes on out at your place. A young woman, all those men, no proper supervision. Ethan turned on him fast enough that Chester actually stepped back. You got something to say? Say it plain. I'm just telling you what people are thinking. No, you're spreading poison and calling it concern. Mara Quinn is my employee. She does her job, and she does it well. What people think about that is their problem, not mine. Easy, Cross. I'm on your side here. No, you're not. You haven't been on my side since Sarah died, and you tried to buy my land at half its worth. Ethan climbed onto the wagon. Stay away from my ranch, Chester, and keep your mouth shut about my housekeeper, or we're going to have a problem. He drove away before Chester could respond, but he felt the man's eyes on his back the whole way out of town. The anger lasted until he was halfway home. Then it faded into something more complicated, worry maybe, or uncertainty. He'd defended Mara instinctively, without thinking, but Chester's words had planted seeds, whether Ethan wanted them to or not. What would people think? What were they already thinking? And more importantly, did it matter? Mara was waiting when he pulled into the yard, ready to help unload. She took one look at his face and paused. What happened? Nothing. Town gossip. About me? He hesitated too long. Her expression shuddered. I see. Mara, it's fine. I'm used to it. She grabbed a sack and headed for the house. People talk. That's what they do. It's not fine. What they're saying doesn't matter. She turned back. Unless it matters to you. It doesn't. Good. Then let's get these supplies put away before it rains again. She walked off, and Ethan was left standing there feeling like he'd somehow failed a test he didn't know he was taking. That night, after dinner, he found her in the garden. She'd been working on it every spare moment, clearing, planting, tending. Now she was on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds by lamplight. You don't have to do this now, he said. Weeds don't care what time it is. They'll choke everything if you let them. He crouched beside her, picked up the rhythm of the work. They pulled weeds in silence for a while, the only sound the rustle of plants and the distant call of night birds. I told Chester Holt to shut his mouth about you, Ethan said finally. Mara's hand stilled. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. What he was implying was the same thing people always imply about women like me, that we're improper, desperate, that any man who hires us must have questionable motives. She sat back on her heels. I've heard it before. I'll hear it again. That doesn't make it right. No, but getting angry about it doesn't change anything either. She looked at him directly. The only thing that changes people's minds is time and proof. They'll believe what they want until they see evidence otherwise. And what evidence is that? That I'm just what I said I was, a housekeeper who knows how to work. That you're just what you are, a man trying to save his ranch. Nothing more, nothing less. Is that all we are? The question surprised him as much as it did her. He hadn't meant to ask it. Mara studied him for a long moment. What else would we be? I don't know. Friends, maybe? Maybe. A small smile. Though I've never had a friend who argued with me about pulling weeds. And I've never had a friend who insisted on working 18-hour days. Then we're poorly matched. Or perfectly matched, depending on how you look at it. She laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite sounds she made when the men told jokes at dinner. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less guarded. Get back to work, Ethan. These weeds won't pull themselves. They finished the row together, and when they walked back to the house, something felt different. Lighter, maybe. Like a weight neither of them had known they were carrying had shifted just slightly. 2 weeks later, the first real test came. Tom's horse threw a shoe while they were moving cattle to the winter pasture. The animal came up lame, favoring its right front leg so badly it couldn't bear weight. Tom got down to check, and Ethan could see from 50 yards away that the news wasn't good. It's bad, Tom called out. Looks like he stepped wrong, might have pulled something when the shoe came off. Mara rode up on the mare she'd been working with, the same one she'd treated for the abscess, now sound and steady. She dismounted and approached Tom's horse carefully. Let me see. Tom stepped back, and Mara ran her hands down the horse's leg with the same gentle competence she brought to everything. The gelding shifted nervously but let her work. Not a pull, she said after a moment. He's got a crack in the hoof wall. It spread when the shoe came off. See here? She pointed to something Ethan couldn't make out from where he stood. It's going to hurt like hell, but it's not permanent. We need to stabilize it, keep weight off it while it heals. How long? Tom asked. 6 weeks, maybe 8. He'll need special shoes when we reshoe him. Bar shoes to support the hoof while the crack grows out. You know a lot about horseshoeing for a housekeeper, Tom said, but there was no challenge in it anymore. Just curiosity. Dated a farrier once, picked up a few things. She straightened. Can you make it back on foot? I can manage. Good. Ethan, can you pony his horse back to the ranch? I'll stay and help finish moving the cattle. Are you sure you can handle it? She gave him a look that made him feel foolish for asking. They finished the job with Mara working as hard as any of them, reading the cattle's movements, anticipating where they'd try to break, positioning herself with an instinct that couldn't be taught. By the time they got back to the ranch, she was exhausted and covered in dust, but the job was done. That night, Danny asked her where she'd learned to work cattle. Here and there, she said. You pick things up when you pay attention. You're better at it than some cowboys I've known. That's because most cowboys spend more time talking about working cattle than actually doing it. The men laughed, and Mara smiled into her coffee. Winter came early that year. Snow started falling in mid-November, light at first, then heavier. The temperature dropped until morning breath turned to fog, and water in the basins froze overnight. The ranch settled into the hibernation rhythm of all Montana winters. Feed the stock, keep the fires going, wait for spring. But this winter felt different. The kitchen was warm when Ethan came in from morning chores, warm and full of the smell of food that actually made him hungry. The house was clean, organized, functional. The men were healthier, better fed, more content. Even the animals seemed to be doing better. The chickens laid consistently now, the horses were in good weight, the cattle had made it through the move to winter pasture without losses. Small things. But small things added up. Ethan found himself lingering in the kitchen more often, drawn by the warmth or the company or both. Mara didn't seem to mind. She worked around him, and they fell into conversations that started about the ranch and wandered into other territory, books they'd read, places they'd been, things they'd seen. She was smarter than he'd expected, though he felt guilty for being surprised. Well-read, thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to poetry. She'd lived more lives than most people twice her age. Farm girl, camp cook, housekeeper, a dozen other things in between. "Why'd you never settle anywhere?" he asked one evening. They were at the kitchen table, her mending clothes while he worked on the accounts. Outside, snow fell steadily, muffling the world. "Never found a reason to," she said, threading a needle. "Most places, I was just filling a temporary need. When the need was gone, so was I." "You never wanted something permanent?" Wanting and getting are different things. She started stitching a tear in one of Tom's shirts. "I wanted a lot of things when I was younger. A home, a family, someone who saw me as more than just useful. But you learn to adjust your expectations. That's a sad way to live." "It's a practical way to live." She glanced up. "What about you? You had permanent, had a wife, a home, a ranch that was thriving. What was that like?" The question caught him off guard. People didn't usually ask about Sarah. They either avoided the subject entirely or brought it up with such careful sympathy that it made him want to hit something. "It was good," he said slowly. "Hard sometimes, the way ranching always is. But good." Sarah made everything seem manageable, even when it wasn't. She was the backbone of this place. And when she died, the backbone went with her. Mara nodded like she understood. "You're rebuilding it now, though, the backbone." "Trying to." "Succeeding." She knotted off the thread and bit it clean. "This place is in better shape than it was 2 months ago. You can see it in everything. The buildings, the animals, the men, even you." "Me? You don't look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders every minute of every day. That's improvement." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. She made it sound simple, but nothing about the last 3 years had been simple. "That's your doing mostly," he said. "That's both our doing. I just helped you remember what you were trying to save." She went back to her mending, and Ethan pretended to focus on the accounts. But his mind was elsewhere, turning over her words, examining them from different angles. The crisis came without warning, the way crises usually did. Ethan woke to shouting and stumbled downstairs to find Jack in the kitchen, snow-covered and breathing hard. "It's the barn. One of the mares is down." They ran. The mare was on her side in the stall, flanks heaving, eyes rolling white with pain and fear. Ethan recognized her immediately. Jessie, a 6-year-old quarter horse Sarah had loved, pregnant with her first foal. "How long has she been like this?" Ethan demanded. "Found her 10 minutes ago when I came to feed. She's been trying to push, but nothing's happening." Ethan's stomach turned to ice. A foal stuck in the birth canal could kill both mare and baby in minutes. They were too far from town to get a vet, even if they could afford one. Mara appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a coat over her nightgown. "What's wrong?" "Foaling trouble," Jack said. "Bad." She pushed into the stall without hesitation, kneeling in the straw beside the laboring mare. She put a hand on Jessie's neck, murmuring low, then carefully examined the situation. "The foal's breached," she said after a moment. "Coming backward. We need to turn it or we'll lose them both." "You know how to do that?" Ethan asked. "I've done it once. For a goat, not a horse, but the principle's the same." She looked up at them. "I'll need help. Hot water, clean towels, and someone with steady hands." "I'll help," Ethan said. "Then wash up, thoroughly. And Jack, keep everyone else out of here. The mare doesn't need an audience." They worked for over an hour. Mara directed everything, her voice calm and certain even when her hands were trembling. She talked Ethan through it. How to feel for the foal's position, how to apply pressure without causing more damage, how to work with the mare's contractions instead of against them. It was brutal, messy work. The mare screamed. The foal wasn't moving enough. Ethan's shoulders burned from the strain, and Mara's face was white with concentration. "Almost there," she said. "One more push. Come on, girl, work with me." The mare heaved, and suddenly everything shifted. The foal came free in a rush of fluid and membrane, small and still on the straw. "Is it alive?" Ethan asked. Mara was already clearing the foal's airway, rubbing it vigorously with towels. For long seconds, nothing happened. Then the foal gasped, coughed, and drew its first shuddering breath. "Alive," Mara said, and her voice cracked slightly. "It's alive." The mare lifted her head, making a low sound of recognition. Mara helped position the foal where it could nurse, and they watched as nature took over, the foal searching, finding, beginning to feed. Ethan sat back against the stall wall, exhausted and shaking. "You saved them both," he said. "We saved them both." Mara was crying, he realized, silent tears tracking through the dirt and blood on her face. "I wasn't sure we could, but you tried anyway." "Of course I tried. What else was I going to do?" He reached out and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back, and they sat there in the straw, watching new life take hold while the sun came up outside. Word spread fast. By noon, half the town knew that Ethan Cross's housekeeper had saved a foaling mare. By evening, the other half knew and had added their own embellishments. By the next day, it was the talk of every business and home in Broken Ridge. Agnes Thornton showed up at the ranch that afternoon, ostensibly to deliver supplies, but really to see for herself. "Let me see this miracle foal," she demanded. Mara showed her to the barn, where the foal was standing now on wobbly legs, nursing contentedly while its mother watched with calm pride. Agnes stood there for a long time, just looking. "My husband was a veterinarian for 40 years, she said finally. He would have said this was impossible without proper equipment. "It was mostly luck," Mara said. "It was mostly skill. Don't downplay it." Agnes turned to face her. "People in town have been saying things about you, unkind things, but this they can't argue with. You saved that mare and her foal. That means something out here. I just did what needed doing." "That's what everyone says who's worth a damn." Agnes patted her arm. "You're going to be fine, Miss Quinn. This town may be slow to warm up, but once you prove yourself, they remember." After she left, Ethan found Mara in the kitchen, staring out the window. "You all right?" he asked. "Just tired." "That was good. What you did. What we did. It was necessary." She turned to face him. "Ethan, people are going to talk even more now, about me being here, about us working together. Are you prepared for that?" "Let them talk." "Easy to say, harder when it affects your reputation, your business." "My reputation is built on keeping my word and doing good work. So is yours now. The rest is just noise." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope you're right." He hoped so too. That night, as Ethan lay in bed listening to the house settle, he thought about the day, about Mara's hands covered in blood and birth fluid, working to save something worth saving, about the way she'd cried when the foal finally breathed, about the quiet strength in her voice when she'd said, "Of course I tried." Sarah had been strong too, but in a different way. Steady, unshakable, the kind of strength that held things together through sheer force of will. Mara's strength was different, more flexible maybe, the kind that bent under pressure but refused to break. He didn't know what that meant yet, didn't know what any of it meant. But lying there in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the windows, he found himself grateful for the foal breathing in the barn, for the woman sleeping in the room below, for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things didn't have to stay broken forever. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in December, when Chester Holt rode onto the Cross Ranch with 3 of his men and accusations in his mouth. Ethan was checking the water troughs when he heard the horses. He straightened, hand going instinctively to the rifle he no longer carried during daily work, then forced himself to relax. Chester wouldn't try anything violent. He was too smart for that, too aware of how things looked. "Cross," Chester called out, reining in his horse with unnecessary flourish. "We need to talk." "So, talk." Chester dismounted, his men staying mounted behind him like sentries. "I'm missing 15 head of cattle, prime stock. They were in my north pasture 3 days ago, and now they're gone." "That's unfortunate. What's it got to do with me?" "Tracks lead this direction, right up to your property line." Ethan felt cold spread through his chest. "You accusing me of something?" "I'm saying cattle don't walk off on their own, and the trail leads here. Draw your own conclusions." "I'll draw the conclusion that you're full of it. I haven't been near your land in months, and I sure as hell haven't taken any cattle." "Then you won't mind if I look around." "I mind plenty. You got a problem, take it to the sheriff. Don't come on my land making accusations without proof." Chester's smile was thin and mean. Proof's what I'm trying to find, and if you've got nothing to hide, seems like you'd cooperate. They were gathering an audience now. Jack had emerged from the barn, Tom from the equipment shed. Danny was halfway from the bunkhouse, and Miguel had appeared at the fence line. And Mara. Mara was standing on the porch, watching with that still intensity she brought to everything. "You want to search my ranch? Get a warrant?" Ethan said flatly. "I could do that. Or you could save us both the trouble and let me take a look now, unless there's a reason you don't want me poking around." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Ethan was about to tell Chester exactly where he could shove his implications when Mara's voice cut across the yard. "Mr. Holt, when exactly did you notice your cattle were missing?" Chester turned, clearly surprised she'd spoken. 3 days ago. "What's it to you? And the tracks you followed, when were those made?" "How should I know? They're tracks." "Tracks tell stories if you know how to read them. Fresh tracks look different than old ones. The edges are sharper, the dirt's disturbed differently. So which were these?" Chester's eyes narrowed. "I don't see how that matters." "It matters because 3 days of weather would have obscured any trail worth following. We had wind Sunday night, frost Monday morning. Unless you're tracking ghosts, those prints you followed can't be more than a day old." "What are you, some kind of expert?" "I grew up tracking. Deer mostly, but the principle's the same. And I'm telling you that if your cattle disappeared 3 days ago, any trail from then is long gone." Chester looked like he'd bitten into something sour. "Maybe I got the timeline wrong. Or maybe you never followed any trail at all," Mara said quietly. "Maybe you just decided this was a convenient opportunity to cause trouble for a man who's already struggling. Now hold on. No, you hold on." Mara came down off the porch, and there was something in her bearing that made Chester actually take a step back. "I don't know what your game is, Mr. Holt, but I know accusation when I hear it. You came here looking to pick a fight, not find cattle. So either show us real evidence or get off this property. You got a mouth on you for a housekeeper. And you've got a lot of nerve for a man making claims he can't back up." They stared at each other, and Ethan saw something flicker in Chester's expression, surprise maybe, or recalculation. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from her. "Fine," Chester said finally. "I'll go. But this isn't over, Cross. Those cattle are somewhere, and when I find proof they're here—" "You won't," Ethan said, "because they're not. Now get off my land before I help you leave." Chester mounted up, jerking his horse's head around harder than necessary. His men followed suit, and they rode out in a cloud of dust and unspoken threats. The silence after they left was thick. "Well, Sam," Tom said eventually, that was interesting." "That was stupid," Jack corrected. "Chester doesn't make accusations without a plan. He's setting something up." "Let him try," Ethan said, but his gut was churning. Jack was right. Chester never did anything without calculating the angles first. "Everyone back to work, and keep your eyes open. If any strange cattle show up on our land, I want to know immediately." The men dispersed, but Mara stayed where she was. "You all right?" Ethan asked. "I should ask you that. He's going to cause problems." "Probably, but you were right about the tracks. 3 days of weather would have erased anything useful." "I know. That's why he didn't have an answer." She crossed her arms. "He's not actually looking for cattle. He's looking for leverage." "Leverage for what?" "To force you into selling, maybe. Or just to make you look bad enough that people stop doing business with you. Either way, he wins." Ethan had considered the same possibilities and liked none of them. "I won't give him the satisfaction." "Good. But watch your back. Men like him don't give up easy." She went back inside, and Ethan stood there feeling like the ground had shifted under him without asking permission. The next blow came faster than expected. 2 days later, Ethan rode into town for feed and found the general store closed. Not just closed for lunch, locked up tight with a sign that said, "Back tomorrow." Except it was 10 in the morning on a Thursday, and Agnes Thornton never closed except Sundays. He tried the feed store next. Same story. Locked up, no explanation. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He found Agnes at her house, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea and an expression that said she'd been expecting him. "Don't start," she said before he could speak. "I'm not happy about it either." About what? Chester Holt called in some favors. Told everyone who supplies you that you're under investigation for cattle theft. Said anyone doing business with you is taking a risk. The knot pulled tighter. And people listened? People are scared, Ethan. Chester's got influence. He can make life difficult for anyone who crosses him. Most folks can't afford that. So they're just going to cut me off? Without even asking if it's true? Agnes sighed. It's not personal. It's survival. You know how it works out here. He did. That was the worst part. He understood exactly why people were making the choice they were making. Didn't mean it didn't burn. How long? He asked. Until Chester's satisfied you're not a threat. Or until you prove the accusation's false. Whichever comes first. And how am I supposed to prove something didn't happen? I don't know, honey. I really don't. She set down her tea. I'm sorry. If I had the power to tell Chester to go to hell, I would. But I don't. Ethan rode back to the ranch feeling like he was drowning. Without feed, without credit, without the ability to buy basic supplies, how long could they last? A month? 2 if they were lucky and nothing broke? He found Jack in the barn and told him everything. Jack listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with each word. Son of a bitch, he said when Ethan finished. He's trying to starve us out. Looks like. What are we going to do? I don't know yet. Let me think. But thinking didn't produce answers. It just produced more questions, each one worse than the last. Mara found him that evening in the office, staring at account books that had stopped making sense somewhere around the 3rd column. I heard, she said, news travels fast. Tom told me. Said we've got maybe 6 weeks of feed left if we're careful. 4 if we're realistic. Animals need to eat, and we can't exactly explain to them that we're being economically strangled. She pulled up a chair and sat. There might be options. Such as? The hunting I mentioned before. There's still game in the hills. We could supplement the feed with wild forage, extend what we have. And the garden, I planted cold hardy crops. They're not much, but they're something. That's not enough to get us through winter. No, but it buys time. She leaned forward. What about driving cattle to market yourself? Skip the local buyers. Take them directly to the railhead in Billings. That's a week's journey each way in good weather. In winter, it's suicide. Then wait for a break in the weather. It's risky, but so is sitting here waiting to run out of options. Ethan rubbed his face. You're talking about gambling everything on one drive. I'm talking about not letting Chester Holt win without a fight. He looked at her then, really looked. She was tired, they all were, but there was steel in her eyes, determination that refused to bend. Why do you care so much? He asked. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the minute I got off that stagecoach. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm not about to walk away from that because things got hard. Something warm unfurled in Ethan's chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. You're stubborn as hell, you know that? I've been told. She smiled slightly. So, are we going to fight or are we going to fold? We fight. Good. Then let's figure out how. They worked late into the night, planning. Mara had ideas, practical ones that made sense even when they seemed impossible. They'd hunt, they'd preserve, they'd stretch every resource until it screamed, and when the weather broke, they'd drive cattle to Billings and get a fair price. Chester Holt's influence be damned. It wasn't a perfect plan. But it was a plan, and right now that was better than nothing. The crisis came from an unexpected direction. Ethan was riding the fence line 2 days later when he found them, 4 cattle that definitely weren't his, grazing contentedly on his winter pasture. The brand was clear even from a distance. Starline Ranch, Chester's cattle. His first instinct was rage. The bastard had planted them here, set up his accusation to look legitimate. It was so obvious it made Ethan's teeth hurt. His second instinct was fear. Because if Chester had put them here, he'd be back with witnesses to discover them. And when he did, Ethan's reputation would be destroyed beyond repair. He rode back to the ranch at a gallop. Mara was in the yard when he arrived, hanging laundry despite the cold. She took one look at his face and dropped the sheet she was holding. What happened? Chester's cattle. 4 of them, on our land. He planted them. Of course he did, and he'll be back with half the town to find them, and then I'm done. No one will trust me. No one will do business with me. Ethan. She gripped his arm. Slow down. When did you find them? Just now, north pasture. And the tracks around them? He stopped. I didn't look. Then that's where we start. She called for Jack and Tom, explained the situation in quick, efficient sentences. We need to document everything, the cattle's condition, where they were found, the tracks around them, all of it. What good will that do? Tom asked. It'll show how they got there. Chester's smart, but he's not perfect. He would have had to move those cattle onto the property, and movement leaves traces. They rode out together, Ethan, Mara, Jack, and Tom. The cattle were still there, oblivious to the chaos they represented. Mara dismounted and began examining the ground with the same focus she brought to everything. Fresh tracks, she said after a few minutes. Multiple horses coming from the west. They drove these cattle in yesterday, maybe the day before. Can you prove that? Ethan asked. The tracks don't lie. Look here, the edges are still sharp, the ground's still disturbed. And here's where they cut your fence, see? The wire's been clipped and tied back, then repositioned to look intact from a distance. Jack examined the fence. She's right. This was deliberate. So we've got proof he planted them, Tom said. What now? Now we move them, Mara said. Drive them back onto his land before he can come find them here. That's risky, Jack warned. If he catches us, he won't. Because we're not going to sneak around. We're going to drive them right up to his front gate and leave them there, with a note explaining that his cattle wandered onto our property and we're returning them. Public. Documented. Above reproach. Ethan stared at her. That's either brilliant or insane. It's both, but it's also the only move he won't expect. He's counting on you either hiding the cattle and looking guilty, or confronting him and looking aggressive. This does neither. This makes you look like the honest rancher you are. She was right. It was risky, but it turned Chester's trap back on him. All right, Ethan said. Let's do it before I come to my senses. They drove the cattle off the cross ranch and onto the road, moving them at a steady pace toward Starline Land. It took 3 hours, and every minute Ethan expected to see Chester appear with armed men and accusations. But the road stayed empty, the countryside quiet except for the sound of hooves and the occasional bovine complaint. They left the cattle in a holding pen near Chester's main gate, with a note nailed to the post. Found your missing stock on my north pasture. Figured you'd want them back. E. Cross. Think you'll buy it? Tom asked as they rode away. Doesn't matter if he buys it, Mara said. What matters is how it looks to everyone else. We found his cattle, we returned them. We did it publicly. That's not how cattle thieves behave. She was right again. By the time they got back to the ranch, Ethan felt something unknot in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the absence of immediate panic. That evening, Agnes Thornton showed up with supplies. Heard what you did, she said, hauling a sack of flour into the kitchen. Returning Chester's cattle like that. They were his. Seemed wrong to keep them. Bull. You knew exactly what he was doing, and you turned it around on him. She grinned. Half the town's talking about it. Chester looked like he'd swallowed a toad when he found that note. Couldn't accuse you of theft when you'd just returned his property, could he? I suppose not. And the tracks Mara documented? Tom's been showing them to anyone who'll listen, explaining how the fence was cut, how the cattle were driven in. People are starting to ask questions about who's really playing games here. Ethan glanced at Mara, who was trying very hard to look like she wasn't listening while she worked at the stove. We just did what needed doing, he said. You did more than that. You fought smart instead of fighting angry. That's rare. Agnes patted his shoulder. I can't lift the restrictions yet. Chester's got too much influence for that. But I can look the other way when certain supplies happen to show up at your ranch. Can't prove where they came from if I don't ask, can I? After she left, Ethan found Mara in the pantry, taking inventory of what Agnes had brought. You saved us today, he said. We saved us. I just pointed the direction. It was more than that. The way you read those tracks, the way you figured out his plan. I grew up learning that survival means being smarter than people who want to hurt you. This was just a different kind of predator. Still, thank you. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to keep thanking me, Ethan. We're in this together now. Your problems are my problems. That's not in your job description. Neither was delivering a foal or fixing fences or half the other things I've done. But here we are. She went back to her inventory. Besides, I'm not about to let Chester Holt run me off before I prove myself. I'm stubborn that way. I've noticed. She smiled, and Ethan felt that warmth again, the sense that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he'd thought. The weeks that followed were tense. Chester didn't retaliate directly. He couldn't, not without looking worse than he already did. But his influence remained, a shadow that kept most suppliers at bay. Agnes helped where she could, sneaking essentials through back channels. But it wasn't enough. They were bleeding resources, and everyone knew it. Mara's hunting expeditions helped. She'd take Miguel or Tom into the hills and come back with deer, rabbit, once even an elk that kept them in meat for weeks. She'd preserve everything, smoke it or salt it, or can it in jars she'd salvaged from the basement. The garden produced more than Ethan had expected, turnips and cabbage and root vegetables that stretched their supplies further than he'd thought possible. But it was still a losing battle. Feed dwindled, money ran out. The banknote deadline loomed in January like a noose. Christmas came and went with little celebration, a meal slightly better than usual, a quiet acknowledgement that they'd made it through another year. Mara made cookies from hoarded sugar and flour, and the men treated them like treasure. On New Year's Eve, Ethan found himself sitting in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed. The account books were open in front of him, the numbers refusing to add up no matter how many times he checked them. They had 3 weeks until the note came due. 3 weeks to come up with money they didn't have. "You're thinking too loud." He looked up to find Mara in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, hair loose around her shoulders. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I don't sleep well when I'm worried either." She came in and sat across from him. "How bad?" "Bad. We're not going to make the payment." "What happens if you don't?" "Bank forecloses. We lose the ranch." She absorbed this quietly. "All of it." "All of it. Sarah's grave, every building, every acre she and I built together. Gone." "Then we don't let that happen." "Mara, I appreciate the optimism, but not optimism, pragmatism." She leaned forward. "The weather's been clear. Cold, but clear. If it holds another week, we could make that drive to Billings. Get ahead of the local market, sell directly to the buyers there. That's a week's journey in winter conditions with no guarantee the weather will hold or that we'll get a fair price when we arrive. Better than sitting here watching everything fall apart." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, too uncertain. But the truth was, she was right. Doing nothing meant losing everything. At least this way they'd go down fighting. "All right," he said. "We'll leave as soon as the weather permits. But I'm not taking all the cattle. We keep enough back to rebuild if this works. And you're not coming." "The hell I'm not." "Mara, you'll need someone who can cook on the trail, someone who can help manage the herd. I've been working cattle for months now. I know what I'm doing. It's too dangerous. Everything we've done has been dangerous. This is no different." They stared at each other across the table, and Ethan knew he'd already lost this argument. She was coming whether he liked it or not, because that's who she was, stubborn and brave and refusing to be left behind. "Fine," he said, "but you follow orders. If I say we turn back, we turn back. Understood?" "Understood." She held out her hand. He shook it, sealing the deal, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. They spent the next week preparing. Jack would stay behind with Danny to watch the ranch. Tom and Miguel would come on the drive, along with Ethan and Mara. They'd take 30 head, enough to make the journey worthwhile. Not so many they couldn't manage them. Mara prepared food that would keep, packed supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Tom checked every horse, every piece of tack. Miguel sharpened knives and tools, quiet but thorough. The morning they left, the sky was clear and cold, the kind of crisp winter day that could turn deadly in hours if the weather shifted. Jack gripped Ethan's hand. "You're sure about this?" "No, but we're doing it anyway. Bring them back safe, all of them." "Plan to." They moved the cattle out at first light, pushing them gently toward the road that would take them east. Mara rode near the back, watching for stragglers, her breath fogging in the cold air. She caught Ethan looking and raised a hand in greeting. He nodded back, trying to ignore the knot of worry in his gut. This was either the smartest thing they'd ever done, or it would be the mistake that destroyed them. Either way, there was no turning back now. The first 2 days went smoothly, too smoothly, like the calm before something terrible. The cattle moved well, the weather held, and they made good time. They camped in a valley the second night, building fires for warmth and cooking the stew Mara had prepared in advance. "Tomorrow we hit the open country," Tom said, studying the map by firelight. "Nothing but grassland for 20 miles. If the wind picks up, then we'll deal with it," Ethan said. One problem at a time. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they'd used up their luck, and the bill was coming due. The storm hit on the third day. It came from nowhere. One minute the sky was clear, the next it was black with clouds that rolled in like mountains collapsing. The wind picked up to a scream, and snow began to fall so thick it erased the world. "Get them bunched!" Ethan shouted. "Don't let them scatter!" They worked in chaos, trying to keep the cattle together while the storm tried to tear everything apart. The animals panicked, trying to run, and it took every ounce of skill to turn them, to hold them, to keep them from stampeding into oblivion. Ethan lost track of time, lost track of everything except the cattle and the storm, and the desperate need to survive. He saw Mara through the swirling snow, working her horse like she'd been born to it, turning cattle with precision, even in conditions that would have defeated most cowboys. And then her horse went down. Ethan saw it happen, the animal stepping wrong, stumbling, pitching forward. Mara went flying, hit the ground hard, and didn't move. He was off his horse before thinking, running through snow that tried to pull him down. The cattle were everywhere, panicking, hooves pounding the frozen ground. One wrong step and she'd be trampled. He reached her and hauled her up, half carrying, half dragging her away from the herd. Her eyes were open but unfocused, blood running from a cut on her forehead. "Mara, can you hear me? I'm all right. My horse—" "Forget the horse. Can you stand?" She tried, wobbled, and he caught her. Tom appeared out of the storm, leading Ethan's mount. "Get her on the horse," Tom shouted. "I'll handle the cattle." Ethan lifted Mara into the saddle and climbed up behind her, holding her steady as they fought their way clear of the chaos. Miguel had gotten most of the herd bunched, holding them through sheer determination. Tom joined him, and together they managed what seemed impossible, keeping 30 terrified cattle from scattering across Montana. The storm lasted 3 hours. When it finally broke, they'd lost 5 cattle and Mara's horse, but everyone was alive. Ethan got Mara down off the horse and checked her over properly. The cut on her head was ugly but not deep. She had bruises forming already, and she moved carefully like everything hurt. "You scared the hell out of me," he said. "Wasn't exactly pleasant for me either." She touched the cut and winced. "How bad?" "You'll live, but you need rest. We need to keep moving." "Mara, the cattle are spooked. If we stop now, we'll never get them going again, and we've already lost time." She met his eyes. "I can ride. I'll be fine." She wasn't fine, but she was right about the cattle, and they both knew it. They pushed on through the afternoon, moving slower now, being careful. Mara rode with Ethan, and he could feel her trembling with pain or cold or both. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. That night, around the fire, Tom cleaned her wound while Miguel kept watch on the herd. "You did good today," Tom said. "Damn good. Most people would have panicked when that horse went down." "Panicking wouldn't have helped." "No, but it's what most people do anyway." He tied off the bandage. "You're tougher than you look, Miss Quinn." "I keep telling people that. They keep being surprised." Tom laughed. "Not anymore, they won't." Later, after Tom had gone to check the cattle, Ethan sat beside Mara at the fire. "You should be resting." "I'm resting now." "You know what I mean." She turned to look at him, firelight catching the angles of her face. "I meant what I said before. We're in this together. That means I don't quit just because it gets hard. You could have died today. But I didn't. And neither did you, or Tom, or Miguel, or most of the cattle. We survived. That's what matters." "Is it enough, though, just surviving?" "Sometimes surviving is all you can do. And sometimes that's its own kind of victory." Ethan didn't have an answer to that. So he sat with her in silence, watching the fire burn down to coals while the cattle settled for the night, and the stars came out overhead, cold and distant and utterly indifferent to the small struggles of people trying to make it through one more day. But they'd made it. Against the odds, against the storm, Against everything that had tried to stop them, they'd survived. And tomorrow, they'd do it again. They reached Billings on the 6th day, battered and exhausted, but with 25 head of cattle still intact. The railhead sprawled ahead of them, stockyards and loading pens, cattle from a dozen ranches waiting for the eastbound trains. The smell hit first, that particular combination of animal, manure, and commerce that meant civilization and money and the possibility of survival. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, just slightly. They'd made it. "Where to first?" Mara asked. Her voice was hoarse from days of cold wind and shouting over cattle. The bandage on her forehead was grimy, but she'd refused to let him change it, insisted they keep moving. "Stockyards office. Need to register the herd, find out who's buying." They pushed the cattle into a holding pen, and Ethan went to handle the paperwork while Tom and Miguel watched the herd. Mara followed him into the office, a cramped building that smelled like cigars and old coffee. The clerk behind the desk looked up when they entered, took in their trail-worn appearance, and made a note on his ledger. "Name? Ethan Cross, Cross Ranch, out of Broken Ridge. How many head? 25. Mixed stock, prime condition." The clerk consulted another book. "Buyers are paying $22 a head for prime beef right now. Take it or leave it." Ethan did the math fast. 25 times 22 was $550. Not enough. The banknote was $600, and they still needed money for feed, for supplies, for everything they'd burned through to make this trip. "What about private sales?" he asked. "Anyone looking for specific stock?" "Maybe. There's a buyer from Chicago in town looking for breeding stock. Pays premium if the animals are exceptional, but he's picky." "Where can I find him?" "Grand Hotel, room 12, name's Morrison. Good luck getting his attention, though. Half the ranchers here have been trying." Outside, Ethan explained the situation to Mara while they walked toward the hotel. "$550 isn't enough," she said. "No, but if I can convince this Morrison to look at our cattle, maybe pay premium for a few—" "How much premium?" "Could be $40, $50 a head for the right animals. We only need him to buy 15 or so at that rate. We'd have enough." The Grand Hotel was the nicest building in Billings. 3 stories of painted wood and actual glass windows. Ethan felt acutely aware of how he looked. Trail dust, worn clothes, a week's worth of beard. Mara looked worse, still bandaged and moving stiffly. "Maybe you should wait outside," he said. "Not a chance. You need backup in case this goes sideways." The desk clerk directed them upstairs with barely concealed distaste. Room 12 was at the end of the hall. Ethan knocked. "What?" came a voice from inside. "Mr. Morrison? I'm Ethan Cross. I've got cattle you might want to see." A long pause. Then the door opened. Morrison was younger than Ethan expected. Maybe 35, well-dressed in city clothes, with sharp eyes that cataloged everything in seconds. Those eyes landed on Mara and stayed there a moment longer than comfortable. "I've seen 50 ranchers this week," Morrison said. "They all claim they've got prime stock. What makes yours different?" "Because I'm not trying to sell you culls dressed up nice. I'm offering genuine quality. Animals I raised myself, bred for strength and endurance. Montana stock that can handle anything." "Everyone says that?" "Not everyone brought their housekeeper on a winter cattle drive to prove it." Morrison's eyebrows went up. He looked at Mara again, reassessing. "That true?" "Every word," Mara said. "And I can tell you about each animal's lineage, temperament, and condition if you're actually interested in quality instead of just claiming you are." A smile flickered across Morrison's face. "All right, you've got my attention. Show me what you've got." They walked back to the stockyards, Morrison asking questions the whole way. Mara answered most of them. She'd spent months working with the cattle, knew them individually in ways Ethan sometimes forgot. She pointed out bloodlines, explained breeding choices, described each animal's strengths with the kind of detail that made Morrison actually take notes. At the pens, Morrison examined the cattle with professional thoroughness. He checked teeth, ran hands over flanks, studied conformation and muscle development. Tom and Miguel watched from a distance, trying not to look nervous. After 20 minutes, Morrison straightened. "I'll give you $45 a head for these 8. He pointed to specific animals. "And $35 for these 6. The rest you'll have to sell at market rate." Ethan did the math. 8 times 45 plus 6 times 35 plus 11 times 22. That was enough. Just barely, but enough. "Deal, pa," he said, before Morrison could change his mind. They shook on it, and Morrison promised payment by end of day. As he walked away, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Actual, tangible hope that they might survive this. "We did it," Mara said quietly. "You did it. The way you talked about those cattle, he would have walked away if not for that." "We did it," she repeated. Together. They collected payment that evening, $630 in cash that felt impossibly heavy in Ethan's pocket. Enough for the banknote, enough for supplies, enough to maybe, possibly make it through to spring. They found a boarding house that would take them for the night. Cheap rooms that were still luxurious compared to sleeping on frozen ground. Ethan paid for baths for everyone, watched his crew disappear into steam and hot water with expressions of pure bliss. His own bath was brief but necessary. A week of trail dirt swirled down the drain, and he emerged feeling almost human. He dressed in the one clean shirt he'd packed and went to check on Mara. She answered his knock wrapped in a robe, her hair wet and hanging loose. The bandage was gone, revealing the cut that was healing better than he'd expected. Without the trail dirt and exhaustion weighing her down, she looked younger, softer. "You all right?" he asked. "Better. That bath was the best thing I've felt in a week." She touched the cut carefully. "I cleaned it properly. Should heal without a scar." "You did good out there, on the drive, with Morrison, all of it. So did you." They stood there awkwardly, both aware they were alone in a way they hadn't been in months. At the ranch there was always work, always other people. Here it was just them, and the silence felt weighted with things neither knew how to say. "I should let you rest," Ethan said finally. "Ethan." She caught his arm as he turned. "Thank you for letting me come, for trusting me. You earned that trust 100 times over. Still, it means something." He looked at her, really looked, maybe for the first time. Saw not just the capable housekeeper or the skilled ranch hand, but the woman underneath all of that, strong and stubborn and absolutely refusing to be anything less than herself. "You mean something," he said, surprising himself. "To the ranch. To me." She held his gaze. "You mean something to me too." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and uncertainty. Ethan wanted to say more, wanted to close the distance and find out if this warmth in his chest meant what he thought it might mean. But Mara stepped back first, breaking the spell. "Get some rest. Long ride home tomorrow." He left and spent half the night lying awake, thinking about the way she'd looked at him and what the hell he was supposed to do about these feelings that had somehow crept up without permission. They started back the next morning, minus the cattle, moving faster without a herd to manage. The return journey should have felt lighter. They'd succeeded. They'd saved the ranch. But Ethan couldn't shake a growing sense of unease, like they were riding toward something bad instead of away from danger. On the third day, they met a rider coming the opposite direction. He flagged them down, urgent. "You folks from Broken Ridge?" "That's right," Ethan said. "Why?" "There's been trouble. Fire at one of the ranches, and word is Chester Holt's been making noise about the Cross place, saying things that got people riled up." Ethan's blood went cold. "What kind of things?" "That you've been cutting corners, treating your help poorly. That woman working for you, he's been saying things about her that ain't fit to repeat." Beside him, Mara had gone very still. "When did this start?" she asked quietly. "Few days after you left. Got worse when folks realized you'd taken her with you on the drive. Chester's been telling anyone who'll listen that it ain't proper, that there's something untoward going on." "That's a damn lie," Tom said hotly. "I'm just telling you what's being said. Thought you'd want to know before you rode back into it." After the rider left, they sat in tense silence. "He's doing this on purpose," Mara said. "Trying to destroy your reputation while you're gone and can't defend yourself." "Let him try. People know me." "Do they?" "Because from what I've seen, people believe what's convenient, and right now it's convenient to believe Chester's version." She wasn't wrong. The town had been skeptical of her from the start. All Chester had to do was water those seeds of doubt, and they'd grow into something poisonous. "What do you want to do?" Miguel asked. Ethan looked at Mara. Her jaw was set, but he could see the hurt underneath, the familiar pain of being judged, being reduced to gossip and innuendo. "We ride home," he said, and we deal with whatever's waiting. They pushed hard the last 2 days, arriving back at the ranch on a cold afternoon that felt nothing like the victory they'd earned. Jack met them in the yard, his expression grim. "You heard?" "Some of it. How bad is it really?" "Bad. Chester's been to town twice, spreading poison. Half the businesses that were willing to bend the rules before won't anymore. And people are talking about Mara, saying things that would start a fight if I repeated them." Mara dismounted without a word and walked toward the house. Ethan watched her go, that protective anger rising again. "What else?" he asked Jack. "Bank's been asking questions. They heard about the drive, heard you took her with you. The manager implied it showed poor judgment in how you run your affairs. My affairs are none of his damn business. Maybe not. But he controls whether you keep this ranch." Ethan swore. They'd made the money, saved the ranch from foreclosure. But if the bank decided he was a poor risk because of gossip and scandal, they could still refuse to extend any future credit, could still make it impossible to operate. He found Mara in the kitchen, standing at the window with her arms wrapped around herself. "I'm leaving," she said before he could speak. "What? No. This is my fault. I should have known being here would cause problems for you. Should have known people would talk. People always talk. That's not a reason to leave. It is when their talk could cost you everything." She turned to face him. "You've got the money for the banknote now. You can hire someone else, someone who won't come with all this baggage." "I don't want someone else." "Ethan, no. Listen to me." He crossed the room, stood close enough to see the tears she was fighting. "You saved this ranch. You worked harder than anyone I've ever known, never complained, never quit. You think I'm going to let Chester Holt's poison run you off? Not a chance. You don't understand what this will cost you. Then help me understand. Explain to me why I should care more about what Chester thinks than about keeping someone who's proven their worth 100 times over." She shook her head. "Because eventually you'll resent me for it, for making your life harder, for being the reason people won't do business with you. And I won't watch that happen. I won't watch you grow to hate me because I stayed when I should have left. That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. Maybe not. But I can promise that I'm not giving up without a fight. And neither are you, because that's not who you are." They stood there close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, smell the soap from her hasty wash when they'd arrived. Her eyes were searching his face, looking for something. Reassurance, maybe, or certainty he wasn't sure he could give. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. "Stay. Help me figure out how to fix this. And if we can't fix it, then we'll have tried. But I'm not letting you leave because of what other people think. That's their problem, not ours." She laughed, a sound somewhere between amusement and despair. "You're too stubborn for your own good. I learned from the best." That got a real smile. "All right, I'll stay. But we need a plan." They worked on the plan that night, sitting at the kitchen table while the crew ate dinner in the bunkhouse. The solution, when it came, was radical enough to make Ethan's stomach hurt. "We get married," he said. Mara stared at him. "What?" "Think about it. Right now you're just the housekeeper people have questions about. But if you're my wife, legitimately, legally my wife, that changes the narrative. It says this was never improper, that I had honorable intentions from the start. That's insane. Maybe. But it solves the problem. People can't gossip about scandal if we make it respectable." "Ethan, you can't just marry someone to stop gossip. Marriage it's supposed to mean something. It does mean something. It means we're partners, that we're building something together. Isn't that what we've been doing anyway?" She stood, paced to the window and back. "You're talking about marriage of convenience, a business arrangement. I'm talking about making official what's already true. You run this household. You work this ranch. You've earned a place here, and this would prove it beyond question. And what about you? What do you get out of this besides solving a scandal?" He looked at her, at this woman who'd transformed his dying ranch, who'd worked herself to exhaustion, who'd nearly died on a cattle drive because she refused to quit. What did he get? "I get you," he said simply, "however that looks, as a partner, as help, as whatever this is between us. I don't know what to call it, but I know I don't want to lose it." Mara's expression softened. "You really mean that?" "Every word. But I won't force this. If you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll even help you get wherever you want to go. But if you're willing to stay, Then let's do it right. Let's take away every weapon Chester has and build something he can't touch. She was quiet for a long time, thinking. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. All right, I'll marry you. But we're clear on what this is, a practical arrangement, partnership, not romance. Understood. And if either of us wants out later, we'll figure it out. I won't trap you in something you don't want. She held out her hand. Deal. He shook it, sealing an agreement that felt both completely logical and utterly insane. They were married 3 days later in the Broken Ridge Church, with Jack and Agnes as witnesses. The preacher looked skeptical but performed the ceremony without comment. Mara wore the only good dress she owned, dark blue, simple, nothing fancy. Ethan wore his Sunday's clothes that smelled like storage and uncertainty. The vows were standard, the kind said in churches every week. But when Ethan said, "I do," and slipped a simple band on Mara's finger, his mother's ring found in a box Sarah had kept, it felt like more than just words. It felt like a choice, deliberate and binding. They walked out of the church as husband and wife, and the town was waiting. Word had spread fast. Half of Broken Ridge was gathered outside, some curious, some supportive, some clearly there to judge. Chester Holt stood near the back, his expression unreadable. Agnes embraced Mara first. Don't you mind them. You're family now, and family is family. Other approached, some offering congratulations, some just staring. Martha Connolly looked like she'd swallowed something bitter, but managed a tight smile and a best wishes. Chester was the last to speak, intercepting them before they could reach the wagon. Well played, Cross, he said quietly. Didn't think you had it in you. Had what in me? The spine to actually commit. Most men would have just let her go, found someone less complicated. Mara's not complicated. She's capable. There's a difference. Is there? Chester's smile was sharp. We'll see how long that lasts. Winter's not over yet, and neither is your trouble. He walked away, leaving a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Back at the ranch, the crew was waiting with an attempt at celebration. Tom had made a cake that was lopsided but edible. Danny had strung up some ribbon. Miguel had picked wildflowers that were already wilting in the cold. To the boss and Mrs. Cross, Jack said, raising a cup of coffee since they had nothing stronger. May you be as stubborn together as you are apart. Everyone laughed, and Mara smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan found himself standing outside Mara's door, except it wasn't her door anymore. She was his wife now, legally if not in practice. The implications of that sat heavy. He knocked softly. She opened the door still dressed, clearly not having intended to sleep yet. We should talk, he said, about how this works. Practically. All right. They sat in her room, his wife's room, he corrected mentally, and worked out the details. Separate bedrooms for now. Public unity always. Private honesty about what this was and wasn't. An agreement that if circumstances changed, they'd revisit the arrangement. It was all very reasonable and practical and completely inadequate for describing what Ethan actually felt, which was a confusing mix of relief and terror and something that might have been the beginning of love if he was being honest. But he didn't say that. Instead, he said goodnight and left her to her privacy, and tried not to think too hard about how natural it had felt to call her his wife. The response from town was mixed. Some people seemed relieved, scandal resolved, respectability restored. Others were skeptical, convinced this was just a cover for something unseemly. And a few, like Agnes, seemed genuinely pleased that two people who clearly worked well together had made it official. Business started returning slowly. The feed store reopened its doors to Ethan's credit. The general store stopped refusing service. It wasn't a full restoration of trust, but it was progress. Chester stayed quiet for 2 weeks. Then the next blow came. It was Danny who brought the news, riding in hard from town with panic in his eyes. Boss, there's been an outbreak. Disease at the Morrison Ranch east of here. They're quarantining the whole area, won't let any livestock move until they figure out what it is. Ethan felt the floor drop out. What kind of disease? They don't know yet, but people are panicking, and Chester's been telling everyone that you brought it back from Billings, that your cattle were exposed on the drive. That's impossible. We sold those cattle in Billings. They're long gone. Doesn't matter. People are scared, and scared people don't think straight. They're talking about quarantining your ranch too, just to be safe. If they were quarantined, they couldn't sell anything, couldn't trade, couldn't operate. They'd be frozen in place while their resources dwindled to nothing. Mara appeared in the doorway. "What's going on?" Ethan explained, watching her face harden with each word. "We need to prove our animals are healthy," she said. "Get ahead of this before Chester can use it against us." "How?" "We bring in a livestock inspector, have them check every animal on this ranch, document that we're clean, make it official and public." "That costs money we barely have." "It costs more to sit here and let rumors destroy us." She looked at Danny. "Who's the inspector for this region?" "Dr. Harrison, out of Billings, but he's probably got his hands full with the Morrison situation." "Then we go to him, make him understand this is urgent." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say they couldn't afford another trip to Billings so soon, but looking at Mara's determined face, he knew she was right. They had to fight, even when they were tired of fighting. "All right," he said, "we leave tomorrow." But tomorrow brought a new crisis, one that would change everything. They didn't make it to Billings. The fire started sometime after midnight. Ethan woke to shouting and the smell of smoke thick enough to choke on. He was down the stairs and out the door before his boots were fully laced, Mara right behind him in her nightgown and a coat thrown over it. The old hay barn was engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. The crew was already there, forming a bucket line from the well, but it was clear from the first moment that the barn was lost. All they could do was keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings. They worked for hours in smoke and chaos, eyes streaming, lungs burning. By the time the flames died down to smoldering ruins, the sun was coming up and they were all covered in soot and ash. Ethan stood staring at what was left of the barn, just scorched timber and the acrid smell of destruction. That barn had been standing since his grandfather's time. Sarah used to store her preserves in the loft, said the temperature stayed stable there. Now it was gone. "How did it start?" Mara asked, her voice hoarse. Jack was examining the perimeter, moving carefully through the debris. He stopped near what used to be the back wall and crouched down. When he stood, his face was grim. "Kerosene," he said, holding up a broken bottle. "Someone set this." The words hung in the air like more smoke. "Chester," Tom said, spitting into the ash. "Has to be." "We don't know that," Ethan said, but his gut was churning. The timing was too perfect, right when they were planning to fight back against his accusations, right when they were starting to regain ground. "Who else would it be?" Danny demanded. "He's been gunning for you since Miss Quinn, since Mrs. Cross arrived. This is just him escalating." Mara touched Ethan's arm. "We need to report this. Get the sheriff involved." "Sheriff's in Chester's pocket," Jack said bitterly. "Has been for years. He'll look at that bottle, say it could have been anyone, and file it away with all the other complaints he's never acted on." "Then we make him act," Mara said. "We document everything. We make noise until people have to pay attention." But Ethan was thinking about something else, about how vulnerable they were, how easy it would be for Chester to keep hitting them in ways that couldn't be proven. Fire today, maybe poisoned water tomorrow, cattle let loose, fences cut, death by 1,000 cuts until there was nothing left to save. "We need help," he said quietly. "From who?" Tom asked. "No offense, boss, but we're not exactly popular right now. From people who have as much to lose as we do if Chester keeps getting away with this." Ethan looked at Jack. The other small ranchers, the ones barely hanging on, the ones Chester's been squeezing for years. They must be tired of it too. "They are," Jack said slowly. "But they're scared. Chester's got power, got connections. Going against him is risky." "So is doing nothing." Ethan turned to Mara. "What do you think?" She was quiet for a moment, staring at the ruined barn. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I think we've been fighting alone because we thought we had to. But you're right, there are others. And if we can get them to stand together, maybe Chester's power isn't as absolute as he thinks." It was a long shot, but long shots were all they had left. They started that afternoon despite exhaustion and smoke-damaged lungs. Ethan made a list of every small rancher in 3 counties, people he knew, people Sarah had known, people who'd been at the edge of survival for years and might be desperate enough to take a risk. The first ranch they visited was the Peterson place, 15 miles south. Carl Peterson was in his 60s, running his land with 2 sons and a lifetime of stubbornness. His ranch was small but well maintained, the kind of place that survived on pride and careful management. Carl listened to Ethan's pitch on his front porch, weathered face giving nothing away. "You're asking me to stand up to Chester Holt," he said when Ethan finished. "I'm asking you to stand up with me. There's a difference." Not much of one when it comes to the consequences. Carl spat tobacco juice over the rail. "Chester's already made it hard for me to get supplies, same as you. I complain too loud. He'll make it impossible." "He's already making it impossible. That's why we need to push back now before there's nothing left to save." "And how do you propose we do that?" Mara stepped forward. She'd been quiet until now, letting Ethan lead. "We document everything, every instance of harassment, every cut fence, every suspicious fire. We take it to the territorial governor if we have to, go over the sheriff's head. Chester's power comes from people being too scattered to organize. We change that. We change everything." Carl studied her. "You're the one caused all the fuss in town." "I'm the one Chester decided to use as an excuse to go after my husband," Mara corrected. "Don't confuse his narrative with the truth." A smile ghosted across Carl's face. "She's got spine. I'll give her that." He looked back at Ethan. "All right, I'm in. But we're going to need more than just 2 ranches to make this work." They got the second rancher that evening, Martha Reeves, a widow running her late husband's spread with help from her teenage sons. She'd been fighting Chester's attempts to buy her land for 2 years and was bitter enough about it to jump at the chance to fight back. "About time someone stood up to that snake," she said, signing her name to the document Mara had drafted. "I'll spread word to the others. There's at least 6 more who'd join if they thought it would do any good." By the end of the week, they had 12 ranchers signed on. Not an army, but enough to make noise. Enough to be taken seriously. They compiled everything, years of harassment documented in careful detail. Cut fences, poisoned water, mysterious fires, economic pressure applied through the bank and suppliers. Chester's fingerprints were all over it, even if he'd been careful never to be directly implicated. Mara organized it all with the efficiency she brought to everything, creating a report so thorough and detailed that it was impossible to dismiss. She'd spent hours interviewing the other ranchers, getting their stories, finding the patterns that proved this was systematic rather than isolated incidents. "We should send this to the territorial governor," she said, reviewing the final document, "and the marshal's office. Make it official through every channel we can." "Chester will know we're behind it," Ethan warned. "Good. Let him know. Let him understand we're not backing down." They sent the reports by telegraph and courier, making sure multiple copies reached their destinations. Then they waited. The response took 10 days. A federal marshal arrived in Broken Ridge on a Tuesday morning, a tall man named Sullivan with hard eyes and a reputation for not being impressed by local power structures. He set up in the hotel and started interviewing ranchers, examining evidence, asking questions that made Chester's supporters nervous. Chester tried to bluster his way through it, claiming the accusations were sour grapes from failing ranchers looking for someone to blame, but the marshal wasn't buying it. "You seem to feature prominently in a lot of unfortunate incidents, Mr. Holt," Sullivan said during a public meeting at the town hall. "Cattle that mysteriously wander onto neighboring properties just in time for you to make accusations. Suppliers who suddenly refuse service to your competitors after you have conversations with them. Fires that benefit you by removing competition. That's quite a pattern." "Coincidence," Chester said, but his confidence was cracking. "I can't control what other people buy." "No, but you can influence them. And influence used to harm others is conspiracy, Mr. Holt. That's a federal crime." The room was silent. Half the town was there, watching Chester Holt face consequences for the first time in his life. Sullivan turned to address everyone. "I'll be conducting a full investigation. Anyone with information about harassment, intimidation, or criminal activity related to Mr. Holt's business practices should come forward. You have my word that you'll be protected from retaliation." After the meeting, people approached Sullivan in a steady stream. Not everyone. Some were still too scared or too invested in staying on Chester's good side. But enough. More than enough. By the end of the week, Chester Holt was facing multiple federal charges. His influence evaporated like morning frost in sunlight. Suppliers who'd been afraid of him suddenly weren't. The bank started questioning his accounts. And the other ranchers who'd lived under his thumb for years started breathing easier. Ethan watched it all with a sense of disbelief. They'd done it, actually done it. Don't celebrate yet, Mara warned when he said as much. Chester's cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous. She was right. The attack came 3 nights later. Ethan woke to the sound of breaking glass and shouting. He grabbed the rifle he'd started keeping by the bed and was halfway down the stairs when he heard Mara scream. The kitchen window was shattered, and Chester Holt stood in the doorway with a gun in his hand and madness in his eyes. Mara was backed against the counter holding a kitchen knife, her face pale but defiant. "You destroyed me," Chester said, his voice shaking. "Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone because you couldn't just accept your place." "We didn't destroy you," Ethan said, keeping his rifle pointed at the floor but ready. "You did that yourself." "Shut up. This is her fault." Chester gestured at Mara with the gun. "You brought this woman into town and everything went to hell. Respectable men don't marry housekeepers. They don't let them have opinions, make decisions. You should have known your place, both of you." "Our place is exactly where we are," Mara said quietly. "Running our ranch, living our lives. We didn't ask for your interference." "You didn't have to ask. Your existence was interference. A woman like you, thinking she could matter, thinking she deserved respect, it's unnatural." "What's unnatural is you thinking you have the right to control other people's lives," Ethan said. "Now put the gun down before this gets worse." "Worse? How could it get worse? The marshal's going to arrest me. I'll lose everything, my reputation, my ranch, maybe my freedom. All because you couldn't accept the natural order of things." He raised the gun toward Mara, and Ethan didn't think. He moved, throwing himself between them just as Chester fired. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Mara shouting, heard running footsteps, heard Chester screaming something incoherent. Then Jack was there, wrestling the gun away from Chester, and Tom was grabbing Chester's arms, and Danny was pinning him to the floor. Mara was at Ethan's side, pressing something against his shoulder to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," she said, and her voice was shaking. "You're all right. You're going to be fine. Just stay with me." "I'm okay," he managed. "Are you hurt?" "No, you idiot. You jumped in front of a gun for me." Seemed like the thing to do. She laughed and cried at the same time, keeping pressure on the wound while Jack sent Danny running for the doctor. The doctor arrived within the hour, Doc Miller, who'd patched up more ranch accidents than he could count. The bullet had gone clean through, missing bone and major vessels by what he called dumb luck. "You'll be sore for weeks and you're going to have a hell of a scar," Doc said, finishing the bandaging. "But you'll live. Try not to get shot again." "I'll do my best." Chester was arrested by Marshal Sullivan that same night. The assault charge added to his growing list of crimes meant he'd be in federal prison for years, possibly decades. His ranch would be seized to pay his debts and legal fees. Everything he'd built through intimidation and cruelty was dismantled in the span of a week. The town reacted with a mixture of relief and shame. Relief that his reign was over, shame that it had taken outsiders to stop something they all knew was wrong. Ethan's recovery took weeks. The wound was clean but painful, and Doc's orders were strict. No heavy work, no riding, nothing that could tear the stitches. It made him restless and irritable. Watching others do work he was used to handling himself. Mara ran everything while he healed. She managed the ranch, coordinated with the crew, handled the business arrangements that were suddenly flowing their way again now that Chester's influence was gone. She did it all with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. And Ethan found himself watching her more and more, seeing things he'd been too busy or too blind to notice before. The way she moved through the house like she owned it, because she did now, legally and in every way that mattered. The way she anticipated problems before they happened and solved them before they became crises. The way she commanded respect from men who'd initially dismissed her, earning it through sheer capability. The way she sat with him in the evenings, reading aloud or just talking, keeping him company during the tedious recovery. One night, about 3 weeks after the shooting, she was changing his bandages, a task she'd taken over from Doc because she was gentler and didn't lecture him about being an idiot. "You're healing well," she said, examining the wound. "No infection, scars forming clean. You got lucky." "I know." Still was a stupid thing to do, jumping in front of a gun like that. "Would you rather I'd let him shoot you?" "I'd rather you'd both not gotten shot at all." She started rewrapping the bandage with careful precision. But since that wasn't an option, thank you for what you did. You would have done the same for me. Probably. We're both idiots that way. They shared a smile and Ethan felt that warmth again, stronger now, impossible to ignore or pretend was just gratitude or partnership. Mara, he said carefully, this arrangement we have, this marriage, does it have to stay just practical? Her hand stilled on the bandage. What are you asking? I'm asking if maybe it could be more. If maybe what we've built here is worth making real in every way, not just on paper. She was quiet for a long moment, finishing the bandaging before she met his eyes. Are you sure that's what you want? Not just gratitude talking, or proximity, or... I'm sure. I've been sure for a while now. I just didn't know how to say it. You're not just my housekeeper, or my partner, or my wife on paper. You're the person I want to wake up next to. The person I want to build a future with. The person who makes me believe that future is possible. He reached up with his good hand and touched her face. I love you, Mara. However that happened, whenever it happened, I do. Tears were sliding down her cheeks. I love you too. I've been terrified to say it because I thought you'd never see me that way. Never see past the convenience to what I actually felt. Then we've both been idiots. Apparently. He pulled her closer and kissed her, gentle and careful of his injury, but full of all the feeling he'd been holding back. She kissed him back like she'd been waiting for this, like she'd been holding back just as much. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling through the tears. So we're doing this? Making it real? If you'll have me. I married you, didn't I? Seemed like a yes already. That was business. This is different. This is better, she corrected. Scarier, but better. They sat there together while the lamp burned down and the house settled around them, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of loss and desperation and built something worth keeping. The ranch thrived over the following months. With Chester gone and their reputation restored, business came back stronger than before. Other ranchers treated them as allies now, part of a community that had learned to stand together. Supplies flowed freely, credit was extended without question, and the name Cross Ranch started meaning quality and integrity instead of scandal and doubt. Mara's ideas continued to transform the place. She expanded the garden into a full operation, trading produce for goods they couldn't make themselves. The chickens became a reliable income stream. She started treating animals for other ranchers, word spreading about her skill until people came from 3 counties away for her help. The old smokehouse became something more, Mara's workshop, where she treated sick animals and taught others what she knew. It wasn't a formal clinic, just a place where people could bring problems and find solutions. But it filled a need the region had been missing, and it made Mara indispensable in a way that had nothing to do with gossip or scandal. Spring came with new calves and the promise of rebuilding. They hired 2 more hands to replace the losses from the hard years. The hay barn was rebuilt, larger and better than before. Fences were mended, buildings repaired, equipment replaced. Sarah's grave got regular visits now, from both of them. Ethan would tell her about the changes, about how the ranch was thriving again. Mara would leave flowers and talk to her like an old friend, thanking her for building something worth saving. You think she'd approve? Mara asked one day, standing by the headstone. Of you? Absolutely. She'd love you for keeping her ranch alive. Ethan put his arm around her waist. And for putting up with me. That part is harder, Mara teased. On a warm day in May, they held a gathering at the ranch. All the ranchers who'd stood with them against Chester, plus new allies, plus half the town. Agnes brought food, the Petersons brought music, and people filled the yard with talk and laughter and the kind of celebration that marked not just survival, but victory. Marshal Sullivan showed up, now reassigned to the territory permanently. He shook Ethan's hand and kissed Mara's cheek. You two started something good here, he said. Not just taking down Chester, that was justice, but building this community, getting people to trust each other again. That's harder and more important. We just did what needed doing, Mara said. That's what everyone says who changes things. Sullivan tipped his hat. Keep doing it. Later, as the sun set and people started heading home, Ethan and Mara stood on the porch, watching the last guest depart. The ranch stretched out before them, buildings solid, fences strong, livestock healthy. A place that had been dying 3 years ago, now vibrant with possibility. Think we'll ever have a quiet year? Mara asked. Probably not. This is Montana. Something's always trying to kill you. Comforting thought. But we'll handle it, together. She leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his good arm. Together sounds good. Tom came out of the barn leading the mare and her foal, the one they'd saved that terrible night months ago. The foal was nearly full-grown now, strong and healthy, a testament to desperate effort and stubborn refusal to give up. Reminds me of us, Ethan said. What, the horse? The whole situation. Something that should have died. That everyone expected to die, surviving because someone cared enough to fight for it. Mar considered this. That's either very profound or very sentimental. Can't it be both? I suppose it can. She turned to face him properly. You know what I realized? What? We never had a real wedding night, just separate rooms and practical arrangements. That's true. Seems like an oversight. We should probably fix that. Probably should. They went inside together, closing the door on the Montana night and all its vast emptiness, choosing instead the warmth of the house they'd saved and the life they'd built inside it. The years that followed weren't easy. Ranching never was. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and broken equipment, money troubles and weather disasters. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Mara's clinic grew until it couldn't be ignored. The Territorial Medical Board sent someone to evaluate her work, expecting to find a fraud. Instead, they found a woman with practical knowledge and natural talent who'd been doing skilled veterinary work for years. They offered her formal training, a chance to become licensed. She took it, studying through correspondence courses and occasional trips to Denver, eventually becoming the first licensed female veterinarian in Montana Territory. People stopped calling her Mrs. Cross and started calling her Doc Quinn, a title she wore with the same quiet pride she brought to everything. The ranch expanded. They bought Chester's old land when it was auctioned off, more than doubling their holdings. Hired more crew, bought better equipment, invested in breeding stock that would make them competitive with the big operations, but they never forgot what it was like to be small and struggling and one disaster away from losing everything. They helped other ranchers the way people had helped them, extending credit and assistance and community to anyone who needed it. Agnes Thornton lived to see them succeed, celebrating every victory like it was her own. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at 82, both Ethan and Mara spoke at her funeral, remembering the woman who'd brought them together by writing an advertisement for a housekeeper. Jack retired eventually, too old for the hard work, but staying on as an advisor and friend. Tom married a widow from town and started his own small spread nearby. Miguel saved enough to bring his family up from Mexico, and they became part of the extended community that grew around the Cross Ranch. Danny learned enough to become foreman when Jack stepped down, proving that youth and enthusiasm could mature into genuine skill. Children came, not easily, and not as many as they'd hoped, but 2 daughters who grew up strong and stubborn and absolutely refusing to be limited by what other people thought girls should do. They learned ranching and veterinary medicine from their mother, business and hard work from their father, and the importance of community from everyone around them. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan and Mara stood in the same church where they'd married, renewing vows that had started as convenience and become something profound. The church was packed, not with skeptics this time, but with friends, family, and the community they'd helped build. I promise to keep choosing you, Ethan said, holding both her hands, every day, in every way, to be your partner in work and life and everything that matters. I promise to keep fighting beside you, Mara said. To never give up on what we're building, to keep proving that strength comes in forms people don't always expect. They kissed to thunderous applause, and afterward, at the celebration that spilled across the ranch yard, Ethan watched his wife, his partner, his love, moving through the crowd with grace and confidence. She was talking to a young woman who'd traveled 300 miles to learn veterinary medicine from the legendary Doc Quinn, explaining something with animated gestures that made the girl's face light up. Carl Peterson appeared at Ethan's elbow, older now, but still solid. You done good, Cross, he said, marrying her, building all this. We done good, Ethan corrected. All of us, together. True enough, Carl raised his glass. To community, to stubborn fools who refuse to quit and to women who prove every narrow-minded assumption wrong. I'll drink to that. They did, and around them the celebration continued. Music and laughter, and the sound of people who'd survived hard times and come out stronger for it. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Mara found Ethan again. She was tired. He could see it in the slight slump of her shoulders, but happy in a way that made his chest tight. "Dance with me," she said. "There's no music playing right now." "So? We'll make our own." They danced in the twilight, swaying to a rhythm only they could hear, while around them the ranch settled into evening peace. The buildings stood strong, the fences held firm, the cattle grazed contentedly in pastures that had been empty and overgrown a decade ago. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Getting off that stagecoach? Staying when things got hard?" Mara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Not for a second. This is exactly where I was meant to be. Even with all the fighting, all the struggle, especially with that. Easy things don't build character. They don't create community. They don't change anything." She touched his face gently. "We changed things, Ethan. We took a dying ranch and a town full of fear, and we made something better. That's worth every hard moment." "I love you," he said, because it was true and because he never got tired of saying it. "I love you too. Now stop being sentimental and keep dancing. My feet hurt, and I want to enjoy this before I have to sit down." He laughed and pulled her closer, and they danced until the stars came out, and their daughters called them inside for cake, and the future stretched ahead full of promise and possibility and the absolute certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The ranch that had been dying when Mara arrived now thrived under their joint stewardship. The woman who'd been dismissed and doubted became a pillar of the community. The man who'd lost everything found reasons to keep living, keep building, keep hoping. And the marriage that started as desperate practicality became a love story that people told their children, about strength in unexpected places, about choosing to fight instead of surrendering, about two imperfect people who found each other in the wreckage and built something that lasted. Years later, when journalists came to write about Montana's first female veterinarian and the ranch that survived impossible odds, they always asked the same question: how did you do it? How did you succeed when everything was against you? And Mara's answer was always the same, simple and true. We refused to quit. We found people who believed in us, and we built something together that was stronger than any one person could create alone. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic, no divine intervention, no sudden windfall that solved everything. Just hard work and stubborn determination and the radical act of believing that things could be better if you fought hard enough to make them so. Just two people who'd been broken in different ways, finding each other and choosing every single day to build instead of surrender. To love instead of fear. To create community instead of accepting isolation. The Cross Ranch stood for generations after Ethan and Mara were gone, a testament to what they'd built. And in the town of Broken Ridge, in the stories passed down through families, they were remembered not for their struggles, but for their victories. Not for what they'd lost, but for what they'd created. A hardened rancher who learned to trust again. A dismissed woman who redefined what strength looked like. And together, they didn't just survive the frontier, they reshaped it into something better, proving that the most radical act of all is simply refusing to give up on the possibility that tomorrow might be better than today. That was their legacy. That was their story. And it was enough.